Chapter 43. The next time I saw Suzy wasn't in the real world, but on TV. That year, the local TV station started to promote one talent show after another, triggering a nationwide movement to create stars. At first, this kind of thing was very far away from me, but later on, our school was stirred up because of a talent show. One of our schoolmates had entered the final of the show and became a famous star in just a blink of an eye. That schoolmate was Suzy. When I got the news, I dropped my jaw in surprise. Suzy was beautiful, but she was just an average-looking girl. She was far from being a heavenly beauty. Moreover, I had never heard that she was good at singing or anything like that. I couldn't help but be surprised when I heard the news. Later on, I watched the recording of Suzy's performance on the talent show. I didn't know if it was because of her makeup or something else, but Suzy looked much more beautiful in the TV. She exuded a special charm, and her watery eyes were very lively. No matter who saw them, they would feel that they were attracted to her. However, when I looked at Suzy's face, I felt a little uneasy. Her face was rosy, but there was a mass of thick black smoke between her eyebrows. It was obvious that there was something wrong with her health. Moreover, her complexion was too good, which made her look abnormal. It was as if she was strong on the outside, but weak on the inside. Since I was watching through the TV screen, I wasn't sure if I had seen her correctly. However, I couldn't help but worry. I wanted to visit her, but her identity was different now. She had moved out of her house, and it was hard to find her. I had no choice but to give up. In the blink of an eye, it was the summer vacation of my junior year. At this time, I had mastered dozens of yellow talismans recorded in the death scripture. At the same time, I started to study the hand seals and the footwork. I could barely protect myself, but I didn't dare to relax. I was always on guard against Professor Deng's sudden appearance. In the past 2 years, Professor Deng suddenly disappeared. I secretly went to the university where he worked to investigate, but I didn't get any information. In addition, I also investigated the local Feng Shui Metaphysics Association. However, it's a relatively closed organization. Unless someone introduces you to it, you can't join it. After investigating for a while, I didn't make any progress, so I decided to give up. However, the longer Professor Deng didn't show up, the more I felt that he was preparing something. When he showed up in the future, he would use the cruelest means to kill me. Every time I thought about this, I would force myself to study the techniques of the geomancy masters recorded in the death scripture. However, these techniques were related to geomancy. With my current level, it was useless to just study by the dead. I had to go out and see the world. Only then would I be able to improve my geomancy knowledge. At this moment, my chi drawing technique has already reached the level of chi drawing technique like silk. Now, I can only rely on my own hard work, but I won't be able to improve any further. There was only one way for a Feng Shui master to reach the next level, and that was to find a dragon. Searching for a dragon was not searching for a true dragon like in the legends, but for a dragon's vein. This dragon vein was not the Kunlun mountain of the ancestral court of the dragon vein of the world, nor was it an ordinary hill with only a trace of dragon chi. Instead, it was the true dragon vein hidden in the mountains and rivers. Dragon seeking was definitely not what ordinary people thought it was. It was not just to provide funeral services and find rich graves for people. To a Feng Shui master, searching for a dragon was a kind of cultivation. A true dragon was hard to find. Many famous mountains and rivers didn't necessarily have a true dragon hiding there. However, in some shallow and low mountains, one might encounter a true dragon. In the study of geomancy, there was a saying, searching for a dragon in 10 years. This saying was enough to show the difficulty of searching for a dragon. A Feng Shui master had to spend 10 years to find a true dragon's vein. Although it was difficult, no Feng Shui master would give up on this cultivation. Not to mention 10 years. Even if it was 20 or 30 years, as long as a Feng Shui master could find a true dragon's vein, he would die without regrets. Searching for a dragon wasn't just a chance for a Feng Shui master to verify his knowledge. After finding a true dragon's vein, he would receive great benefits. In terms of chi drawing technique, He could directly advance from qi drawing technique like finger to qi drawing technique like pillar. Previously, from qi drawing technique like silk to qi drawing technique like finger, I had studied all the yellow talismans. I had even dabbled in the hand seals and the astral steps to reach this realm. However, how much was the distance between a hair and a finger? What was the difference between a finger and a stone pillar? From qi drawing technique like finger to qi drawing technique like pillar, there was no hope of reaching this realm. Only a dragon's vein had this kind of power. Some feng shui clans or sects with inheritances would have a true dragon's vein found by their ancestors for their descendants to study and use. Each true dragon's vein was a huge treasure, enough to support the rise of a feng shui clan or sect. It was their ultimate secret, and the outside world would never know about it. As for me, a feng shui master without a sect or inheritance, I could only rely on myself to walk the world. I had to use my feet to measure the land and find a true dragon's vein that belonged to me. How difficult was this path? Many geomancy books had recorded that from ancient times until now, there were only a few dozen people who had found a true dragon's vein, such as Zhang Daoling, Chun Tuan, and Three Reed's True Monarch. And these dozens of people were all grandmasters who had founded their own sections. No matter how difficult it was, this was the only path in front of me. I had to walk it to know if I could reach it. Coincidentally, it was time for me to leave the university for my internship in the 4th year of university. Many of my classmates began to send their resumes everywhere, looking for companies for internships. I also packed my luggage and began to plan my travel. At this time, Chief Lu suddenly contacted me one day. He told me that he needed my help with something. He asked me to go to his company to discuss it in detail. It was like someone giving me a pillow when I was sleepy. I immediately agreed, packed my luggage, and returned home. After resting for a while, I hurried to Chief Lu's company. This was the first time I had come to Chief Lu's company. When I had met him before, I only knew that he was a wealthy businessman. However, after seeing his company with my own eyes, I finally understood what kind of wealthy businessman he was. It was a 30-story building, and it was all Chief Lu's office building. Just this building alone was a sky-high price, not to mention his other factories and hotels. Compared to his assets, the 10,000 and 100,000 renminbi that I had treated as a sky-high price the last 2 times were just a drop in the ocean, not worth mentioning. When I arrived at the place, I reported to the receptionist. Soon, a beautiful girl took me to the top floor and brought me to Chief Lu's office. After entering the door, Chief Lu warmly greeted me. However, whenever I asked him about the grave relocation, Chief Lu didn't want to talk about it. He just gave me a vague answer. After exchanging greetings, Chief Lu told me why he had called me here. According to him, this matter was related to his ancestor. I guess he wanted to find a place, so he came to me for help. His words made me feel a little strange. Geomancy masters could find dragons, seal acupoints, or even exorcise ghosts. What kind of place was he looking for? It was more appropriate to find a geographer or something like that. Why did he call me here? It didn't seem right. However, I wasn't in a hurry to ask. After Chief Lu explained, he got up and took out a yellowed booklet from the safe behind him. Let me take a look at the content first. As soon as I saw the booklet, I felt a sense of déjà vu. However, after taking a closer look, I realized that I had never seen it before. I suppressed my curiosity and asked Chief Lu, "What's this?" Chief Lu smiled and said, "Mr. Zhou has seen this before. However, it was through the safe, so he didn't see it directly." After he said that, I suddenly remembered that when I first met him, he purposely tested me to see if I could see what was bothering him. Then, I made a judgment based on his face and the safe shrouded in ancestral energy. My interest was piqued. I asked Chief Lu, "Is this the item in the safe?" Chief Lu nodded with a smile. "This is a booklet passed down from my ancestor. It records some of my ancestors' past events. Some of them seem unimaginable. In the past few years, I've always thought that they were the work of my ancestor in his spare time. However, after seeing some things in recent years, I feel that some of them might be true." Chapter 44. At the end of the Ming Dynasty and the beginning of the Qing Dynasty, Kaifeng Prefecture was the administrative center of Hunan Province, which was now the provincial capital. It was economically prosperous. Because the local area was rich in peanuts, Kaifeng was the oil hub of 13 provinces in the south, 7 north, and 6 north. Almost all the oil merchants in the country had set up shop in the local Yufeng Street. Because of the bad behavior of the merchants, they were often short on weight and bullied the market. The government took the money but did not care about it, which made people angry. One night, the sound of the night watch came from the Yufeng Street. The weather is dry. Be careful of the fire. Bang, bang, bang. In the Liu family's old shop, a middle-aged woman was awakened and saw her man sitting on the edge of the bed, smoking a pipe. "Husband, why aren't you sleeping?" "I can't sleep. This year's peanut harvest is good. The new oil will be 30% cheaper than last year's. I'm afraid we will lose the oil we have in stock." The woman thought and said hesitantly, "I heard from the shop staff that other shops mix sesame oil and cotton oil into the oil. That's why the price is so low." "Husband, should we—" Before she finished, the man snorted, "God is watching what people do. Our Liu family has always been honest. This immoral trick can be popular for a while, but can it last?" The woman sat up with her clothes draped over her shoulders and said timidly, "Husband, have you heard? Old Gao's family all buried magnets under the big scale. Giving one caddy is 2 taels less. Today, the foreign merchant came back directly after buying the oil, but old Gao didn't give it to him and even gave him a good beating. This world, in the whole old oil lane, our family is the most honest." The man was still unmoved. He took a puff and seemed to not want to continue this topic. Doing business is being a man. We have to be conscientious. Go to sleep. It's the Mid-Autumn Festival in 2 days. We have to get up early to prepare the tributes to the fire god. Bless us to get through this year safely. The woman seemed to be a little angry and muttered, I know. It's better to pray to the fire god to bless us to get rich. A good man like you doesn't bless us. Why do you worship the fire god?" Old Liu knocked his pipe on the brick bed and scolded, "Don't talk nonsense. There's a god watching over you." Sleep. The woman muttered and went to help the man take off his clothes. At this time, an old voice suddenly came from the street. "Big fire for 14 taels, small fire for 15 taels. Huo is a type of noodle dish in the north, commonly called huo. Old Liu frowned and muttered, "This muddle-headed old man. How can a small one be heavier than a big one? 15 taels is almost a caddy. Is this for humans or for pigs?" In ancient times, a caddy was 16 taels per caddy. The woman rubbed her stomach and pleaded, "Husband, let's go buy 2. I'm hungry." Unable to resist the woman's pleading, old Liu put on his clothes and went to the street. Sure enough, he saw a blurry figure walking back and forth not far away. "Sir, give me a fire." The old man stopped and turned around to look at him. Suddenly, he disappeared into thin air, as if he had never appeared. But the peddler's voice still echoed in the street. "Big fire for 14 taels, small fire for 15 taels. Old Liu rubbed his eyes in disbelief, not only because the old man disappeared into thin air, but also because when the old man turned around, he saw the face of the god of fire. His legs were numb, and he stood there for a while before old Liu came to his senses. He muttered a curse and hurried back to his shop. It was strange that the old peddler shouted in the oil square street for 3 nights. But no matter who came out to look for him, they could not find him. It was very strange. 3 days later, on the Mid-Autumn Festival, the festive festival made people forget the peddler's voice in the middle of the night. On this night, a gust of wind suddenly blew on the old oil square street. Then, a fire came out of nowhere and suddenly spread. Water is on fire. A mournful scream came from the west end of the oil square street, echoing the sound of the wind and waking everyone up. The woman shook old Liu awake, put on her clothes, and hurriedly ran out. When they ran to the street, the fire was like a snake snaking through the whole street. The crackling sound of burning could be heard. Countless people held buckets of water, kneeling on the ground with tears and snot, praying to God for rain to extinguish this damned fire. But when they looked up, There was only a jade plate like moon hanging in the sky, coldly watching the joys and sorrows of the world. Big fire for 14 taels, small fire for 15 taels. Old Lou suddenly remembered the peddler's voice that echoed in the oil square street for 3 days, and the old man who looked exactly like the god of fire when he turned around. He suddenly understood something. He madly rushed into his shop on the east side of the street, took out the hook scale that had been passed down for 5 generations, ran out of the house, and knelt down in front of the fire. Grandpa God of Fire, my ancestors have always been honest people. This is the jingling 16-tael scale. He kept shouting and roaring at the top of his lungs. A miracle happened. When the fire spread to his shop, it suddenly stopped, then turned around and continued to burn to the west. Old Lou's eyes were full of tears, and he kept kowtowing on the ground. Thank you, Grandpa God of Fire. Thank you, Grandpa God of Fire. The fire burned for a whole night, and the whole oil square street was reduced to ashes. Only the Lou family shop still stood in the ashes. Speaking of which, it was strange. This fire burned down all the shops on Yufeng Street, but it did not hurt a single person, nor did it burn down any residential houses. The stores that were usually short on weight, the more severely they burned. The stores that did not usually bully the market still had 20% of their stock left. The common people applauded, saying that this was Grandpa God of Fire's punishment for those black-hearted profiteers. For a time, oil was more expensive than gold in Kaifeng City, and this matter also became the topic of people's leisure time. The Lou family shop was praised by the common people as the symbol of a shop with a conscience. Although his own stock was saved, Old Lou did not sell a high price. He still bought and sold, and business was booming. When the oil square street regained its vitality, the Lou family shop was already the largest shop. Later on, when the Hunan Qingxian government official heard of this story, he personally wrote a board with the words, "Shop with a conscience," to show glory. Old Lou hung the board and added the words, "Honest to all, no 2 prices on both sides." Then he built a fire god temple at the east end of the oil square street, and the incense never stopped burning throughout the year. The descendants of the Lou family also followed this teaching and continued to operate the oil shop and gradually developed it into a large business. After closing the booklet, Boss Lou looked at me and said slowly, "The old Lou in this story is my ancestor. My business was also passed down from generation to generation." I nodded and was a bit confused. The story is very interesting, but Boss Lou, what does the place you want to find have to do with this story? Boss Lou waved his hand, signaling me to calm down, then took out a thin piece of paper from a safe and carefully spread it in front of me. I looked down. It was a piece of paper that had been mended, and there were some messy lines on it like an ancient map. I didn't have time to look at the things on it and frowned. There was a thick aura of death on this piece of paper, as if it was an old item that just came out of grave. I couldn't help but think about how Boss Lou insisted on moving the grave. I had my suspicions at the time, but now it looks like he did it because of this piece of paper. I looked down to take a closer look. There were a few lines of small words under the messy map. In the 3rd year of Qianlong, I traveled to Shenangjia with my friend. I met the fire god temple in the mountains and experienced all sorts of dangers. My friend and servant died here, and I was lucky enough to escape with my life. I invited people to go with me again, but the sea of clouds was vast, and I couldn't find them. I searched 7 times and found 27 dead people, but I didn't know where they were. I couldn't understand them, and I experienced all sorts of absurd things that made me afraid. It's a pity that I can't fulfill my wish, so I record the picture here and hope that future generations can learn from it. After that, there were traces of tearing on the paper, and there seemed to be some unfinished words, but I couldn't see them anymore. After reading it, I roughly understood what Boss Lou meant, so I asked him, "You're talking about finding this fire god temple?" Boss Lou nodded. "The fire god was kind to my ancestor, and finding the fire god temple is my ancestor's last wish. I've been preparing for this trip for the past 2 years, and I hope that Mr. Zhou can help me." I frowned and couldn't help but ask Boss Lou, "This story? Boss Lou, do you think it's true?" To be honest, I'm also a feng shui master, and I can believe in mountain spirits and ghosts, but the story of gods is too vague, and I don't really believe it. Chapter 45. Chief Lu's voice was faint, but his eyes revealed a kind of madness, just like those Tibetan Buddhists, pious and fanatical. Seeing his expression, I was a bit interested. Chief Lu was a business magnate. No matter if it was knowledge or wisdom, he was far superior to those village women. Since he was so sure, there must be a reason that I didn't know. I was quietly waiting for Chief Lu to continue, but he didn't seem to have the intention to explain. He shook his head and recovered from his crazed state, then said to me with a smile, "It doesn't matter if it's a story or not. Our Lu family rose from a great fire. Our ancestors have been the descendants of the fire god for generations. For the last wish of our ancestors, we have to try." While saying that, Chief Lu took a checkbook from the side and wrote a check for me with a few strokes. "This is the deposit. If Mr. Zhou agrees, you can take it now." I looked down, and the string of zeros made me a bit dizzy. I counted carefully, and there was more than 500,000 yuan. After thinking for a while, I nodded and took the check from Chief Lu. It was a sign that I agreed to it. I had to say that this much money was very tempting to me, but I didn't do it just for money. After deciding to go out, I wanted to travel around and search for the dragon vein. Everything has a cause and effect, and Chief Lu finding me at this time might be my opportunity. Moreover, I was also interested in Chief Lu's story. It wasn't because of his ancestors, nor was it because of the fire god temple. It was purely because of the word fire god. Huaxia had the custom of worshipping fire since ancient times. Just like the kitchen door ceremony in my hometown, it was actually a continuation of the worship of fire. From this worship of fire, the fire god, the kitchen door ceremony, and other things were either myths or customs. These customs and sacrifices were also closely related to feng shui. Taking the kitchen door ceremony as an example, I only knew from the death scripture that different positions of the kitchen door would have different feng shui. But why was feng shui related to the position of the kitchen door? Perhaps through Chief Lu's matter, I could touch on a deeper level of feng shui. Seeing me take the check, Chief Lu smiled. He patted my shoulder and told me, "I need to make some final preparations. When everything is ready, I'll call you to inform you." After leaving Mr. Lu's office, I took the check to the bank and exchanged it for cash. After depositing it into my card, I didn't hurry to go home. Instead, I went to the antique market nearby. Although Mr. Lu's ancestral grave is in our county, his company is in the ancient city of Kaifeng, which is hundreds of kilometers away. It must be because of the same origin as the Lu family's old restaurant in the story. Kaifeng was the famous ancient capital of 8 dynasties. Although it was not as good as Xi'an and Luoyang, where the world's dragon veins gathered, it was still the spirit of several generations. Even in the urban area, there were many old buildings, and the antique market was unusually prosperous. In terms of the size of the city I studied in was much bigger than Kaifeng, but the size of the antique market was 10 times bigger than that city. It was still not as big as the ancient city of Kaifeng. When I reached the antique market, I saw the wolf hair brush and the yellow talisman paper that I couldn't find the last time. I asked for their prices. They were much cheaper than the last time I bought them. However, I didn't come here to buy these things. I wanted to find a Luo Sutra. The Luo Sutra was a compass. It was the most commonly used item by geomancy masters. Whether it was to check the geomancy of a house, or to find a dragon, or seal an acupoint, they all needed the help of a compass. The method of determining the direction of a geomancy master was incomparably complicated. Sometimes, people would be exhausted. Most of the time, they still had to rely on tools. Moreover, among the techniques of geomancy masters, although there were many kinds of magic tools, the most common and practical one was the compass. Magic tools weren't created, but nurtured. Only geomancy masters at the geomancy master realm and above could nurture their tools for dozens of years. Just the spirit of a tool couldn't be called a magic tool. One had to wait for the geomancy master to find the dragon veins and seal the acupoints to draw the energy of the dragon veins to cleanse their bodies. Only then could the tool be nurtured by them. Moreover, this was just the most common magic tool. The truly powerful ones were the ones that the geomancy master had to find the dragon veins and seal the acupoints. After that, they would be able to recognize the stars and obtain the power of stars. There was a saying in geomancy: 10 years to find the dragon veins and 20 years to seal the acupoints. 40 years to recognize the stars. The meaning of this saying was that a geomancy master had to study for 10 years before he could recognize the dragon veins, 20 years before he could seal the acupoints, and 40 years before he could recognize the stars. This was only for regular geomancy masters. Checking the geomancy of a house would require decades of study. Only after learning all this could one embark on the path of becoming a geomancy master and truly start cultivating. After cultivating, one still had to walk the path of seeking the dragon veins and seal the acupoints. This path was not something that could be completed in decades. Just seeking the dragon veins would cause countless people to waste their entire lives. Even the people of those large sects had the influence of their ancestors and did not need to seek the dragon veins. They would have to go through the many difficulties of recognizing the dragon veins, identifying the dragon veins, and attracting the dragon veins, spending years or even decades. As for the rest, it would depend on talent and opportunity. Only after going through seeking the dragon veins, sealing the acupoints, and understanding the stars could a geomancy master take the step to transcend mortality and become a geomancy master. Since ancient times, the number of people who could become a geomancy master was few and far between. Naturally, such top-grade magical tools were as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns in the world of metaphysics. That was why I came here this time with the original intention of buying an ordinary geomancy compass. If I could find an old item used by a real geomancy master, it would be considered treasure. As for magical tools, I didn't even dare to think about them. As I walked through one shop after another, I saw many geomancy compasses. However, they were all modern metal compasses. Some were even high-tech compasses that could display latitude, longitude, altitude, and other values. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when I saw them. Strictly speaking, when using a compass, there were many things that were related to latitude and longitude, but the old ancestor had his own set of philosophies. If these latitude and longitude values were forcibly inserted into the use of a compass, then it would be completely inappropriate. After looking through several shops, I finally found an old shop that had a large number of wooden geomancy compasses. I was happy, but when I took a closer look, I discovered that these geomancy compasses were carved. The carved geomancy compasses were rigid, and their ability to sense chi was very poor. A truly useful geomancy compass had to be a handwritten one that could sense chi. Moreover, it could be like the yellow talisman paper that could draw chi into it. This was the only way a geomancy master could nurture it and turn it into a magical tool. I was a little discouraged, but then I thought about it. In today's society, there were very few geomancy masters. Besides those who had reached the geomancy master realm, no one else knew about a handwritten geomancy compass that could be used by a geomancy master. It was too difficult to buy one. Holding on to my last bit of hope, I asked the shop owner, who was dozing off in an old-fashioned wooden armchair, "Boss, do you have those old handwritten geomancy compasses?" The owner, who had messy white hair, squinted his eyes and looked at me strangely. Then his eyelids drooped and he muttered, "Kid, you actually know about handwritten geomancy compasses. But where can I find them now? They were all destroyed when the four olds were destroyed." His words reminded me of the old principal story. In that special era, too many things happened. Geomancy metaphysics also suffered a destructive blow, which led to the decline of geomancy metaphysics today. Helpless, I was about to pick a random geomancy compass and ask the owner to help me put it away. Then, the owner suddenly said, "If you really want a handwritten geomancy compass, you can go Madman Jong's shop. You might be able to find one. Go out and turn right. That's the last shop." I was stunned, but my heart was filled with joy. I had already decided to give up, but I didn't expect the owner to provide me with a clue. The owner had helped me, and since I already had the geomancy compass in my hands, I was embarrassed to not buy it. Just as I was about to ask the owner for the price, the owner waved his hand and impatiently urged me. If you want to buy a handwritten geomancy compass, then hurry up. Why are you still dawdling here? The owner's temper was a little strange, but his heart was good. It was clear that he didn't want to take advantage of me. After being urged like this, I put down the geomancy compass in my hands and sincerely thanked the owner. Then, I went out to look for Madman Zhang's shop. Following the owner's instructions, I quickly found a shop. Chapter 46. Usually, rare treasures would appear in the brightest places, but people always had the mentality of picking up leftovers. They always thought that there would be a treasure hidden in a small shop on the street, waiting for them to find it. I was no exception. So, when I saw this small shop and thought about what the shop owner had said, I didn't feel worried. Instead, I felt happy. I strode into the shop. The shopkeeper of this shop was different from the owner with messy hair. He wore a Chinese tunic suit, and his hair was meticulously combed. He wore a pair of old-fashioned glasses and sat on a wooden armchair. He held a pot of tea in his hand and was listening to an opera on the radio. Seeing me enter the shop, the 40-something-year-old shopkeeper stood up. It seemed he was about to come over and help me. But, seeing that I looked too young, the smile on his face disappeared. He faintly asked, "Young man, what do you want to see?" I didn't talk nonsense with him. I directly said that I wanted to find a handwritten compass. "Do you have one here?" Hearing my words, the shopkeeper's face turned even paler. People who buy compasses are usually geomancers, and people's impression of geomancers is that they are old people. My image was very different from a geomancer, so it was no wonder that the shopkeeper didn't have a salty expression. "I have a handwritten compass here, but the price isn't low." "Young man, are you sure you want to buy it?" I nodded. "As long as it's a handwritten compass, I will buy it. But I only want the old ones." Hearing that I wanted to buy it, the shopkeeper squeezed out a smile. "Then you came to the right place. All the things I have here are old, and I can't find new ones." As he said that, the shopkeeper took down 2 compasses from the wooden shelf behind him and placed them on the table in front of me. He then said, "There are only 2 handwriting compasses. The big one is 6,000, while the small one is 300,000. The price is non-negotiable." I hadn't seen it yet, but hearing the price made me take a deep breath. Although handwritten compasses were rare now, they weren't worth such a sky-high price. Puzzled, I lowered my head to look and couldn't lift my eyes. No wonder the shopkeeper told me to come to Mr. Zhang's shop to buy it. It turned out that there were really good things here. Of the 2 compasses on the table, the larger one was just an ordinary handwritten compass. Although it could be seen that it was quite old, it was still relatively new and made of ordinary materials. As for the small compass, it was dark yellow in color, and there were serious signs of wear and tear on its edges. Moreover, its surface gave off a feeling similar to a paste. I knew that many people who liked to play with things like red sandalwood and nanmu needed to grind them day after day to form a paste on the wood. The older it was, the thicker it would be. On the surface of this small compass, there was a thick layer of paste. It was obvious that the person who used it often rubbed it in their hands. This compass must have been nourished by someone for a very long time in the past. Perhaps it was not far from the level of a magic tool. In addition, the material of this compass was tiger bone wood, which had the highest compatibility with qi. Tiger bone wood was also known as heavyyong wood. Compasses made from this wood were the best compasses in the general sense. After hearing the price and looking at the compass, I no longer had any thoughts of picking up a bargain. Shopkeeper Jiang was clearly a knowledgeable person, and his price was very reasonable. There was no room for negotiation. I held the small compass in my hand and secretly channeled energy into it. The magnetic needles on the compass slightly trembled and began to vibrate. I was elated. Earlier, I could only guess that this compass had been nourished by someone. Now that I had channeled energy to test it, I was certain that this compass had been in the hands of a geomaster. Moreover, it had been nourished for more than 10 years. That was why it was so sensitive to qi. To tell the truth, the price that shopkeeper Jiang had asked for wasn't expensive at all. A compass that was close to being a magic tool was definitely worth this price. I placed the compass on the table. As soon as my hand left the table, I felt a slight chill in my palm. My heart stirred, and I channeled energy to my eyes. When I looked at the small compass, I saw a wisp of black and gray energy hovering above it. I could faintly see a slender shadow moving back and forth. Originally, I wanted to open my mouth and say that I wanted to buy this compass, but after seeing this scene, I shut my mouth. The black and gray energy on the compass was yin energy. When a geomancy master nourished a compass, he would often channel energy into the compass. Over time, the compass would contain a wisp of energy. This was also the key to the compass's spirituality, which would eventually lead to it becoming a magic tool. This was originally a good thing, but if the feng shui master died and buried the feng shui compass in the grave before the feng shui compass was cultivated into a magical artifact after a period of time, under the influence of the dead person's aura, the qi contained in the feng shui compass would gradually turn into yin energy. This situation was actually very common. The compass was the treasure that accompanied the geomancy master for the rest of his life. When the geomancy master reached the end of his life, he would ask his descendants to bury his compass with him in his grave. In ancient times, most geomancy masters could only nourish their compasses to the point where they could contain a wisp of energy. It was very rare to see them turn into a magic tool. That way, if these compasses were unearthed, they would become evil holding compasses. If their descendants wanted to use them again, they would have to dissolve the yin energy first before they could gather energy again. Gathering energy was an extremely long process. Who would be willing to waste their time to consume the yin energy? That was why these evil holding compasses were called useless compasses. When I found out that it was a useless compass, my enthusiasm was immediately extinguished. But then, I saw a slender shadow moving inside the black and gray energy. The yin energy was inanimate, so it couldn't move. If I wasn't wrong, the thing that was moving was a snake spirit. Qi was the innate qi, the essence of heaven and earth. Whether it was to humans or other creatures, it was a strong temptation. When this compass was hidden underground, there happened to be a snake spirit that had cultivated intelligence nearby. Coincidentally, it had died. Humans were creatures created by the heavens and earth. They were born with 3 souls, while other creatures lived in chaos. Very few of them could develop intelligence. Even if they did, they would suffer endless punishment from the heavens, and it was very difficult for them to live for a long time. The snake spirit had probably been punished by the heavens. Just as it was about to die, the snake spirit escaped into the compass. It relied on that sliver of qi to avoid the heavens' punishment and formed something similar to the spirit of an arcane artifact within the compass. This situation was very rare. From a certain point of view, this compass could be considered a magical tool. However, it didn't have the function of a magical tool. Moreover, with the snake spirit residing in it, it would be more troublesome to eliminate the yin energy. However, the good thing was that once the yin energy was eliminated and the snake spirit was preserved, this compass would be no different from a real magical tool. After understanding this, I smiled at Mr. Jiang and asked, "Shopkeeper, your compass is an old item, but it has an earthy smell. I'm afraid it's something underground, right?" Mr. Jiang's face changed when he heard me. However, he quickly recovered and smiled. "It doesn't matter if it's something underground or not. If you want it, you have to pay the bill. If you don't want it, I'll put it away. We're doing business here. It's best if we don't talk about other things." If this compass was underground, it meant that Mr. Jiang's identity wasn't something that people could easily see. At this moment, I understood. No wonder the old man had recommended me to this shop. It was likely that they were in cahoots. They purposely opened this remote shop to sell things that couldn't be seen in public. I smiled and said, "Mr. Jiang, you misunderstood me. I didn't mean anything else. It's just that this compass isn't the same as other items." "Mr. Jiang, you're a knowledgeable person. Don't you know that once this compass is stained with death energy, it's just a useless compass?" Mr. Jiang regained his composure at this moment. He smiled and said, "It seems I was wrong. Little brother, you're young, but your knowledge isn't ordinary. Even if we can't do business, we can still be kind. It's my fault this time. Although that compass isn't a good item, it's still worth some money. Little brother, if you like it, you can take it. I didn't expect that Mr. Jiang would be so generous. I shook my head and said, "It's hard to say if I like it or not, but I don't have any use for it. However, I do like this little compass. I want to take it away and study it. Mr. Jiang, please give me a new price." This time, shopkeeper Jiang didn't dare to give me a new price. After thinking for a while, he gave me a price of 100,000. I didn't haggle and took the compass with me. Before I left, Mr. Jiang suddenly asked for my contact number. He told me that if he found a good compass, he could contact me. I didn't mind it and gave him my number. Chapter 47. What was Insha? When the Yin energy in a ghost body reached a certain level, it would turn into Insha. Although the Insha in the waist compass was formed by death chi and chi, it was essentially the same thing. Other geomancy masters had to guide their chi into the compass to neutralize the Insha. However, I didn't need to do that because I had Tong. When Tong had just died and turned into a ghost, she was very weak. Chun Tingting's ghost had always coveted her, but in the end, Chun Tingting's ghost didn't dare to swallow her. The reason was that Tong was a heavenly fetus with 3 souls. She was the nemesis of ghosts. No matter how weak Tong was or how strong the other ghosts were, as long as Tong wanted to, she could swallow any ghost effortlessly. This was the most domineering ability of a heavenly fetus with 3 souls. In other words, the ghosts that other geomancy masters raised could only become Tong's food as long as they hadn't reached the Yin spirit realm. It was a kind of suppression. If she could swallow ghosts, she could also swallow Yin Sha. However, the waist compass had a snake spirit, so Tong couldn't swallow Yin Sha directly. She needed to slowly grind it down. However, it was much faster than using the geomancy master's chi to grind it down. Magic tools needed to be nourished by the geomancy master's dragon seeking and acupoint sealing. Dragon seeking was to give the magic tool a spirit, and acupoint sealing was to let the dragon energy wash the tool and open its spirit. Once the Yin Sha was eliminated, the waist compass would transform into a real magic tool, since the snake spirit was a creature with intellect. After returning to the hotel, I called Tong Tong and told her about the situation. Tong didn't look happy because I had asked her to swallow Yin Sha. However, when she heard that there was a snake spirit inside, her big, round eyes brightened. She immediately hugged the compass. I didn't know what Tong had done, but the compass suddenly emitted black smoke. A massive shadow as thick as a thigh emerged. It was the snake spirit inside the compass. As soon as it appeared, the serpent spirit quickly circled around the room and let out an extremely sharp laughter that made one's scalp tingle. After a while, it stopped and swept its fierce, triangular eyes around before staring at me. "You little brat, I originally planned to come out at night to slaughter you and swallow your Dao Qi. I didn't think that you would be so anxious to die, and even found a little spirit to vainly try to swallow your snake immortal. Aren't you afraid that the wind will cut your tongue? This is simply infuriating." The spirit snake muttered for a long time. In the end, it raised its eyes and glanced at Tong Tong and me. It concluded, "All right, prepare to die." Then he turned into a gust of black wind and stormed toward me. Magic tools are things that I can't even come into contact with right now, and this snake spirit can become the tool spirit of a magic tool, so its strength is quite extraordinary. If I didn't have my eyes and rashly brought it back, I'm afraid that in the end, I would really end up being killed by it and devoured of my Dao Qi. Unfortunately, I had Tong Tong. I looked at the talkative spirit snake with pity. This fellow had been trapped in the compass for many years. It wasn't easy for someone to dig it out from the ground. If it had been in the hands of an ordinary person, it wouldn't have been able to come out without Dao Qi or Yin Qi. Now that it had finally come out, it was unfortunate that it had met Tong Tong again. What was even more unfortunate was that it didn't know that Tong Tong was a heavenly fetus Yin spirit. As I watched it pounce on me, I didn't do anything. Soon, I heard Tong Tong's voice. "You little snake, you don't know your manners." Tong Tong reached out and grabbed the tail of the giant spirit snake from the gust of black wind. She gently swung the spirit snake to the ground. Then she wrinkled her nose and angrily said, "You're not allowed to talk to your brother like that again." The spirit snake was thrown to the ground. Its two triangular eyes were a little dull. It didn't understand why a weak-in spirit, like a little girl, had pulled it back. When it was a spirit snake, it was very strong, let alone Tong Tong and I. Even Professor Deng would have a hard time dealing with it. But now, it had lost its body and was residing in the compass. It wasn't much different from the other Een spirits. How could it be Tong Tong's opponent? After a long time, it jumped up from the ground. It stuck out its tongue and roared, You dare to grab my tail." Before the spirit snake could finish its words, Tong Tong angrily opened her mouth. She looked even angrier than the spirit snake. She pouted and said, You dare to curse." Thud! Tong Tong grabbed the spirit snake's tail and swung it again. It fell from the sky and fell to the ground. This time, the snake spirit was completely dumbfounded. The gloomy expression in its triangular eyes disappeared. Instead, it revealed a somewhat aggrieved expression. It was like a little wife who had been abandoned. It was very resentful. Tong Tong might have felt a little sorry for it, so it hopped over to its side, reached out, and patted its huge head, comforting it. "All right, little snake, don't make me angry, and don't say dirty words again. I won't hit you, okay?" I seemed to see the spirit snake's entire body tremble. It seemed to be a little scared, but it was more angry. It still had the demeanor of an overlord from when it was still alive. It couldn't lower its noble head. Hiss! It spat out its tongue frantically and leaped into the air from the ground. A small bump suddenly appeared on its huge head. Then, its entire body arched from the back of its tail, and a thick black gas gushed out from its bloody mouth. It surged towards Tong Tong and completely enveloped Tong Tong's small body. After doing all this, the spirit snake's body shrunk. It seemed to be much weaker, but its spirit was very excited. It laughed loudly. "Haha, you don't know life from death. You dare to attack your Uncle Snake Immortal. If I don't show my power, do you really think I can't do anything to you?" I was a little worried as I looked at Tong Tong, who was shrouded in black gas. The scene of the spirit snake had shocked me. From a small bump on its head, this spirit snake wasn't simple when it was alive. I was afraid it had reached the stage of transforming into a flood dragon. I guessed its death wasn't an accident, but a failure to transform into a flood dragon. Although it had failed, there was a bump on its head. It had also comprehended some of the flood dragon's supernatural powers. That black gas was probably the flood dragon's flame. No wonder it was so angry. If it had successfully transformed into a flood dragon, it would have become a flood dragon with a wisp of true dragon's aura. It would have been in existence close to the heavenly master of geomancy. Even if it had died, it would have become an Een spirit and not an Een spirit. This kind of spirit snake had lived for more than 1,000 years. It was definitely an overlord in the forest when it was alive. It had never suffered like this before. Unfortunately, it hadn't succeeded in transforming into a flood dragon. Soon, the black gas dispersed. Tong Tong's snow-white hand reached out from the black gas. Her face was tense, and her mouth was bulging. She stood next to the spirit snake's head. I didn't know how she had managed to grab the spirit snake's tail. All he heard was a series of banging sounds, interspersed with Tong Tong's angry voice, one word at a time. "You still dare to speak dirty words." After each sentence, the spirit snake was thrown to the ground. After 8 times, Tong Tong finally released her hand. This time, the spirit snake lay on the ground. Its 2 big triangular eyes were no longer angry. There was only endless bewilderment. The desolate spirit snake's head had an expression that said, "I'm tired. I feel that living is meaningless." Tong Tong rubbed her little hands and still had a cute, angry look. She walked over and leaned on my arm and said with grievance, "Gidge, the little snake is too bad. I already told him not to swear, but he just won't listen. I don't want to educate him anymore." I glanced at the spirit snake, who was lying on the ground. It looked as if a dozen men had dragged her into the forest and raped her for several hours. Then, I turned to look at Tong Tong, who was leaning on my arm. I didn't know why, but I felt a little embarrassed. I rubbed Tong Tong's head and said, embarrassedly, "This little snake doesn't know anything." Chapter 48. After complaining to me for a long time, Tong Tong reluctantly accepted the task. Since the compass was a real object and the Een spirits were attached to the compass, Tong Tong couldn't bring the Een spirits back to the jade bracelet when she swallowed them. She had to leave them outside. These days, Tong Tong stayed with me in the room. During the day, I studied the ways to use the Luo Sutra recorded in the Death Scripture, and Tong Tong slowly eliminated the Een energy. At night, Tong Tong hugged her legs and sat on the bed, listening to my stories. Since she was born, Tong Tong had lived in a world of her own. Her heart was pure, but she didn't know much about this world. Sometimes I told her my experiences, and sometimes I told her stories that I had read in books. No matter how wonderful my experiences or stories were, Tong Tong listened carefully. She wore a smile on her small face as she felt that it was interesting. At first, I thought that Tong Tong was like my little sister, and I couldn't help but want to protect her. But now, I felt that she was more like my daughter. I didn't have the experience of being a parent, but Tong Tong acted like a spoiled child. Sometimes, she pestered me to tell her stories. She was considerate and considerate, just like a warm, cotton-padded jacket. One time, I went out during the day. When I came back at night, I saw Tong Tong lying on the table in the hotel. She puffed her small mouth and blew on the table. I felt strange, so I asked her, "What are you doing?" Tong Tong wrinkled her nose. There'd a lot of dust on the table. She wants to clean it. I didn't know if I should laugh or cry. Tong Tong didn't know how to wipe the tablecloth, but she had the heart to do it. This was the best part of her. I taught Tong Tong how to wipe the tablecloth, broom, and mop. Tong Tong seemed to have discovered a new world. Every day, she would happily clean the room. Every morning, the Annie who came to clean the room sighed with emotion. She has been cleaning the hotel for more than 10 years, but she has never seen a guest like me who loves cleanliness. Tong Tong was happy, but the serpent spirit's life could only be described with one word: miserable. Every day, when his eyes devoured the Een Sha and the compass, because the snake spirit and the Een Sha had already fused into one, he had to slowly extract the Een Sha from the snake spirit's spirit body. This feeling was like picking off a person's flesh bit by bit, and it was extremely painful. Therefore, every time the Een specter was extracted, the serpent spirit would howl in pain. Its huge body kept rolling and grinding. That scene would make anyone who saw it cry. Of course, ordinary people couldn't hear it. Only Tong Tong and I could hear it. However, I wasn't harming the serpent spirit. With its current appearance, it could only be considered an Een spirit at best. But after extracting the Een Chi, it would return to being a real serpent spirit. It could even continue its 1,000 years of cultivation. Although Tong Tong didn't like the foul-mouthed serpent spirit, she couldn't bear to see it in such pain. However, after I told her the truth, and she knew that she was actually helping the serpent spirit, Tong Tong firmly carried out my orders. The saddest thing was that every night, after Tong Tong finished devouring the Een Sha, she didn't hurry to let the serpent spirit return to the compass. Instead, she solemnly told the serpent spirit, "Brother told me that after receiving help from others, I should thank them. This is the most basic courtesy." Therefore, every day, when the serpent spirit was tortured to the point of exhaustion and lying on the ground with suicidal thoughts in its mind, it had to lift its huge head and squeeze out a sincere and enthusiastic smile to thank Tong Tong. After that, Tong Tong narrowed her eyes and patted the serpent spirit's big head. She giggled and praised it. The serpent spirit is so obedient. Several times, after Tong Tong returned to the jade bracelet, the serpent spirit sneaked out of the compass and said to me with a sorrowful face, "Little doll, use your yang spirit to swallow me. After you swallow me, your Tao energy will increase a lot. It'll be very beneficial to you." Every time, I looked at the pitiful serpent spirit with pity and shook my head resolutely. I'm just an Earth Master. I'm still far from cultivating the yang spirit. Moreover, although you're plagued by Insha, you're still a living creature. Only evil people would swallow living creatures. How could I do such a thing? The serpent spirit was very depressed and wanted to die. However, since it had lost its body, it didn't even have the ability to commit suicide. Over time, the serpent spirit seemed to have gotten used to this kind of life. Every time I extracted the Insha, it didn't scream anymore. After I was done, it would proactively approach Tong Tong and warmly thank her like a puppy trying to win its owner's favor. Tong Tong happily came to me and said, "Brother, look, I've taught this little snake to be so obedient." I looked at the serpent spirit, which had completely abandoned its pride as a 1,000-year-old serpent spirit. It only wanted to win Tong Tong's favor. I despised it. In the past, I had only heard that people had Stockholm Syndrome, which was a masochistic tendency. Now, it seemed that it was a common trait of all living creatures. One morning, I was woken up by a soft noise. I lifted my head to see. I didn't know when the serpent spirit had left the compass. It was quietly opening the hotel room door. Since the serpent spirit was the tool spirit of the compass, it could only move within a certain range of the compass. The further it was from the compass, the more difficult it would be to move. It would also have to endure severe pain. Moreover, when it was too far away, it would die and vanish. Of course, it was just a theory. In reality, it was almost impossible to achieve. It was just like how people couldn't suffocate themselves. The pitiful serpent spirit had chosen the most difficult way to commit suicide to get rid of Tong Tong, the great demon king. I sadly watched the serpent spirit open the door. It endured the great pain and struggled to move out of the room. I was deeply moved by its behavior. I gently patted the jade bracelet and called Tong Tong. "Hey, little serpent, where are you going?" As soon as Tong Tong came out, he saw the serpent spirit. He smiled and shouted at him. The serpent spirit, who was carefully crawling out of the room, was shaken. After a few seconds, the snake spirit turned its head and quickly returned to Tong Tong's side. With a flattering look, it said cheerfully, "This little baby has to go out every morning," so I went to open the door for him. As soon as it finished talking, Tong Tong slapped its head and scolded, "How many times have I taught you? You have to call him Big Brother. Don't call him a child. Go and call him Big Brother." The serpent spirit's flattering smile froze on its face. It struggled to turn its head and look at me. It looked as if it had eaten 10,000 flies. It lowered its head in humiliation and softly said, "Big Brother." Tong Tong patted the serpent spirit's head in satisfaction and returned to the jade bracelet. After staying in the hotel for about half a month, the gloomy specter in the compass was finally reduced by more than half under Tong Tong's daily efforts. The last trace of gloomy specter could not be completely eliminated in a short period of time. I could only carry it with me and slowly nourish it with my Qi of Tao. At this time, Chief Lu finally contacted me. He told me that he had prepared everything. He asked me to go to his company tomorrow morning to discuss the trip. The next day, I went to Chief Lu's office and chatted for a while. Chief Lu told me that he had found some people to help him with this trip. He asked me to go with him to meet them. We left the office and went to a small meeting room next door. There was an old Taoist priest with gray hair, 2 middle-aged men, a chubby young man, and a pretty girl. At this moment, the old Taoist priest and the 2 middle-aged men were sitting on chairs with their eyes closed. The chubby young man had his back to me and was talking to the young girl. It seemed they were quarreling. After we entered the room, the other 3 opened their eyes and looked at me. However, the chubby young man didn't seem to hear us and continued to quarrel with the girl. However, that young girl had a very impatient expression and directly stood up and walked towards Chief Lu and me. The plump young man finally stopped talking and turned his head. When I saw his face, I dropped my jaw. Isn't that the fatty? Chapter 49. It really is the fatty. It's been 6 to 7 years since he left with old he. I thought it would be hard to see him again, but I didn't think that we would meet again here. I thought that it would be hard to be familiar with each other after a long time. But when I heard the fatty call me third baby, my childhood memories came flooding back. The fatty also ran in front of me and hugged me. "Third baby, why are you here? Shouldn't you be studying in university?" After a while, the fatty let go of me and asked. I also smiled and told him about my situation, as well as accepting Chief Lu's invitation to explore the Fire God Temple in Shenangjia. "Feng Shui Master." The fatty stared at me with his eyes wide open. He reached out and lightly hammered my shoulder. "I've never seen you study this before. Why are you suddenly doing this?" When Chief Lu asked me about my master, I casually said that I learned it from the fatty's father. I didn't want to say too much in front of Chief Lu, so I pulled the fatty and said, "We'll talk about this tonight. You haven't told me why you're here yet." The fatty pointed at Boss Lu, who was behind me. Boss Lu invited me too. At this moment, Chief Lu saw that we were almost done talking, so he walked forward and said with a smile, "I didn't think that Mr. Xiao Zhou and Master Lin already knew each other." "Master Lin? Fatty?" I turned around and looked at the fatty. I was confused by how Chief Lu called me Master Lin. Seeing that I was confused, Chief Lu explained to me with a smile. "Master Lin is the disciple of Zhenrenguan. Although he's young, his attainments in divination are extraordinary, and he can be called a master." After Chief Lu finished his introduction, the fatty smiled and winked at me. He looked very proud and didn't look like a master at all. He probably went to find a master after he left with old he and learned divination. I didn't think that he would become so famous in just a few years. I wanted to ask him about the details, but the fatty waved his hand and said that we would talk in private later. After we finished our greetings, Chief Lu introduced the rest of the people to me. He introduced the girl first, saying that she was his personal secretary called Bai Ling. She was in charge of the logistics of this mission, and we could find her if we needed anything. Bai Ling will prepare everything we need for us. Then it was the gray-haired, square-headed old Taoist. Chief Lu seemed to be very familiar with him as he introduced with a smile, "This is Kaifeng Taoist Association's Zhao Yongkuan. Mr. Xiao Zhou can be called Taoist Zhao." I nodded and said with a smile, "Although Taoist and Feng Shui are not the same school, they are of the same origin. I will have to trouble Taoist Zhao for this trip." Professor Deng was the vice president of the Feng Shui Association in the city where I studied. His strength was terrifying. Since Kaifeng was an ancient city, the Taoist Association would be even stronger. I didn't dare to neglect the president of the Kaifeng Taoist Association. However, this Zhao Yongquan's expression was a little arrogant. There wasn't much expression on his face. He only nodded at me indifferently as a greeting. He didn't even say a word. I didn't mind. It was normal for a powerful old Taoist to have an eccentric temper. It would be strange if he was friendly with me. Finally, Chief Lu introduced the two sturdy middle-aged men. He said that they were from a security company and that they had a group of retired Special Forces soldiers. They would be responsible for our safety. After introducing us to each other, Mr. Lu gave us Bai Ling's contact information. He told us that if we needed anything, we could contact Bai Ling within the next 2 days. After that, Chief Lu asked the fatty with a smile, "I wonder if Master Lin can perform a divination and set a suitable time for our trip?" The fatty shook his head. "Divination is about fate. How can you predict the good or bad luck of the trip? You should ask him. Feng Shui masters are good at choosing auspicious days." Then he pointed at me. Chief Lu looked at me with a smile. I shook my head helplessly. Whether or not it's suitable for the trip is already fixed in the lunar calendar. There's no need to calculate anything. Tomorrow is the 9th day of the Lunar New Year. How about we set it tomorrow? Before Chief Lu could reply, Zhao Yongquan interrupted, "Tomorrow isn't suitable. Let's set off the day after tomorrow." He didn't say the reason and just said that coldly. Then, he didn't say anything else. I was a bit curious. If he had something to say, why didn't he say it earlier? Why did he have to wait for me to say the date? It seemed like he was targeting me, but I didn't have any enmity with him. This was the first time we met, so why did he have to make things difficult for me? Was he trying to show me his power? Chief Lu seemed a bit awkward and said to me, "Mr. Xiao Zhou, you see, naturally, I didn't need to argue with Zhao Yongquan. The date of the trip wasn't a big deal. It didn't matter if it was a day earlier or a day later. Thus, I smiled and said, 'Then we'll listen to Taoist Zhao.' Let's set off at noon the day after tomorrow. Chief Lu nodded. After seeing that no one had any objections, he set the date. At first, Chief Lu had booked a luncheon at his hotel, but since the fatty and I hadn't seen each other for a long time, we had a lot to talk about. We declined the invitation and left Chief Lu's office. We found a random restaurant and sat down to talk about the things that had happened after we'd been separated for several years. According to the fatty, He was the president of the Feng Shui Metaphysics Association. After he left with He had arranged for him to study in a school in the city. However, after he had followed he had come in contact with many things related to Feng Shui metaphysics. He wasn't interested in studying anymore. He wanted to stay with He and learn about Feng Shui metaphysics. After learning from He for a period of time, Fatty gradually became very interested in divination and showed a strong talent. So He sent him to Kaifeng, where he was apprenticed to a very famous divination sect, Zhan Shi, Dao Divination Grandmaster, and began to learn the way of divination. Strictly speaking, the fatty was a Taoist priest who specialized in divination. I was a little curious. Since you're a Taoist priest, why don't you wear a Taoist robe or a Taoist hairstyle? The fatty said with a serious voice, as a disciple of the three pure ones, the three pure ones should always be in your heart. Why do you need to care about your appearance? Moreover, our Taoist school emphasizes on following our hearts. Of course, we should be free and unfettered. Seeing him talk nonsense with a straight face, just like when he was a kid, I felt relieved. Being a Taoist priest wasn't an idiot. After that, the fatty asked about me. Of course, I couldn't tell him about the red shadow, and I couldn't find any other excuse. I awkwardly told him that I had become interested in Feng Shui after that incident. So, I bought some books and learned from the higher-ups. The fatty was a carefree man. I guess he didn't notice my awkwardness. He didn't doubt me at all. It's not a good idea to study by myself. Later, I'll contact He. If I really want to study Feng Shui, I'll go and learn from him. I was quite interested in his suggestion. In the past few years, I have been learning from the death scripture. Sometimes, I felt confused, and my understanding of many things was somewhat specious. If I could verify my knowledge with someone else, it would definitely help me advance my Feng Shui study. Moreover, it was easy for a person to get entangled by some misconceptions. It was like when I was trying to comprehend qi. If it weren't for Professor Deng's words, I would still be muddle-headed. After chatting for a while, the fatty hesitated. Third baby, I have a question I want to ask you about that incident. I haven't seen you for a few years, so I've been holding in my heart. I was surprised. What is it? The fatty said. That year, after we went to the graveyard to steal food, you told me that there was a female ghost wearing red clothes. She sat on your bed every night. Then, we went to the entrance of the underground palace, and a woman wearing a veil came out. She was also wearing red clothes. I vaguely remember that the graveyard we went to when we were young was right above that underground palace. Chapter 50. Suddenly, the fat man mentioned Red Shadow again. The figure that used to appear by my bed every night suddenly appeared in my head. I was 15 years old that year. I was still at the age where I didn't know anything. At first, I was just afraid of Red Shadow. Later on, I didn't need to be afraid anymore. I slowly got used to her presence and her quiet company. At that time, I was in the middle of puberty. I had too many problems that I couldn't tell anyone. I could only talk to Red Shadow at night. At that time, I was already very dependent on her, but I still couldn't tell what she meant to me. Later, in the underground palace, after Red Shadow entered the giant door, she said to me, "Take care of yourself, my husband." That made me panic. It was said that young people didn't know what it felt like to be sad. However, after Red Shadow left, when I woke up in the middle of the night and looked at the empty bed, I couldn't help but feel upset and disappointed. Perhaps I already knew how I felt about Red Shadow, but God made a fool of me. We were separated by yin and yang, and I didn't know anything about her. What could I do even if I had some feelings for her? I tried to forget her, but I couldn't. I also tried to sort out our feelings, but the more I thought, the more confused I became. I couldn't cut them off, and I couldn't sort them out. Perhaps this was the sorrow of parting with a different taste in one's heart. Until the last time, when I was cornered by the evil Professor Deng, I thought it was Red Shadow. Even at that moment, I still felt happy and panicked. But in the end, my eyes told me that it wasn't Red Shadow. Perhaps from that moment on, I felt that Red Shadow's figure had become much more distant and illusory. Every night, when I looked at the head of the bed, I couldn't remember what she looked like when she was sitting on the bed. So, I didn't think about her anymore. When I couldn't sleep at night, I didn't look at the bed anymore. I thought that I would be very sad if I did this. But the past few years have been peaceful. All right, Red Shadow. I felt that I had buried her in my memory. Until today, when the fat man mentioned her again. A person's heart was like a dam. When it was built, it could block all emotions. However, the higher it was, the easier it would collapse. There were many things that the more you cared about, the more you shouldn't mention them. Once you mention them, the seemingly tall dam would instantly collapse. The fatty's words shattered the high platform I had built in my heart. The sweet and sorrowful memories flooded out. The past was still vivid in my mind. I became quiet and immersed in my own thoughts. I didn't speak for a long time. When the fat man saw that I didn't say anything, his face became even more solemn. After a moment of silence, he said, "Third baby, if you really don't want to tell me, I won't force you. However, I still hope that you can tell me." I pulled myself together and looked at the jovial fatty. He had suddenly become so serious. I panicked and wanted to tell him about the Red Shadow. However, I thought that I shouldn't tell anyone about it. I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I asked him why he suddenly asked me that question. The fatty's expression was a bit gloomy. He took a sip of the fruit juice in front of him and said in a low, muffled voice, "When I left, I burned down the ancestral home to complete my father's task. But in reality, I didn't find my father's body." He sighed and said, 9 generations of ancestors made 9 coffins. Other than being busy with other people's funerals, my father spent the rest of his time preparing the last coffin for himself. But who knew that after he really left, he couldn't even find his body? I furrowed my brows and asked the fat man, "The graveyard was only so big back then. Didn't you and Oldie go back to look for him?" "Why didn't we?" The fat man shook his head. "When we burned down the ancestral home, I carried my father's coffin to the old house. I didn't burn it because I wanted to find my father's body in the future. Actually, on the second day after we left, Oldie sent people to look for him, but they didn't find anything. Then at the beginning of this year, after I finished my apprenticeship with Master, I went back again, but I still didn't find anything. That graveyard wasn't big, but my father must have fallen into the ground like us. But there were only a few tunnels underground. I asked Oldie to ask the others, but they all said that they didn't see my father's body. Then I suspected that he might have been eaten by the skeleton monster. But even if he was eaten, there should be some leftovers, right? But no matter how much I dug, I couldn't find anything." The fat man rambled on, and I gradually understood what he meant. I asked him, "You think your father's body fell into the underground palace?" Fatty nodded. "We had fallen into the underground tunnel outside, but I asked Oldie. He said that the 3 people beside him had fallen directly into the underground palace after they had fallen in. Logically speaking, that's impossible. The underground palace can only be entered through a hole with a formation. But Oldie wouldn't lie to me on purpose. Now that my father's body can't be found, I think it's possible that he fell into the underground palace like Oldie and the others." I nodded and asked him, "Then why didn't you dig deeper to find the tunnel? As long as we entered the tunnel, we would definitely find the underground palace." "Why didn't I dig?" The fat man smiled wryly. "When I went back before the new year, I brought a truck full of underground detection equipment. I even brought a set of the equipment that the exploration team used, which could reach up to 100 meters underground. But guess what? Let alone the underground palace, we couldn't even find the tunnel." Fatty continued indignantly. "When we left, didn't the place collapse? It was like a small earthquake. It's possible that it buried the passageways in the underground palace, but it's impossible for a small earthquake to make everything below disappear. I used the equipment I used. As long as there are traces left below, I'll definitely be able to find it. However, after a few days of hard work, the final conclusion was that there was absolutely nothing under the graveyard. So, I thought about it and decided to start from somewhere else. In the underground palace, besides us who didn't know anything, there was only the skeleton, the female corpse, and the red shadow. The fat man was talking about starting from somewhere else. It was obvious that he was talking about the red shadow. However, even I didn't know where the red shadow was. Where could the fat man go to find her? I thought for a while and decided to be honest with the fat man. You're right. The woman in the red dress is the female ghost I met when I was young. She often appeared around me. However, after we left the underground palace, I've never seen her again, just like you. The fatty originally had some hope, but after hearing what I said, he immediately became discouraged. He reached out and scratched his head. After a long while, he let out a sigh and said disappointedly, "All right then, it looks like there's no hope. I couldn't bear to see him like this. Even if we can't find his corpse, Uncle Lin will be buried in the underground palace. He'll be able to rest in peace. Whether he's buried in your family's house or in the underground palace, I'm sure Uncle Lin won't mind. You shouldn't worry too much about it." After listening to me, the fat man looked even more distressed. It seemed he had something to say in his heart. He pulled his hair. After a while, he said in a strange tone, "Third baby, I want to find my father's corpse. Not only do I want to bury him, but I also want to confirm if he's dead or not." I gawked. At that time, all of us saw his father stab his own heart with a dagger. Do we still need to confirm it? I looked at him worriedly. After keeping silent for a while, I said, "Fatty, are you thinking that because you're too sad?" Chapter 51. The fatty's words shocked me. According to him, in the past few years, he always had the feeling that someone was watching him. Especially after he had learned the art of divination, his sixth sense had become sharper, which made this feeling even stronger. This year, when he finished his apprenticeship, he forgot to bring something with him. When he went back to get it, he found someone in his room. That person didn't want to see him. When he saw the fat man return, he immediately jumped out of the window and ran away. When the fat man pushed the door open, he only saw the man's back. At that time, the fat man didn't chase after him. He was bewildered because he had a feeling that the person who had been watching him all these years was that man. And that man's back looked like his father, Lin Aching. At first, the fat man didn't believe it. However, that man's back was too familiar. Later on, the fat man had divined many times. In the divinations, Lin Aching's fate was also mysterious, which made the fat man even more suspicious. That was why he had returned to the village right after he finished his apprenticeship to search for his father's remains. The main reason was to confirm his suspicions. At first, I didn't believe him. However, the fat man insisted. Although he had learned divination late, his spirit sense was really strong. Subconsciously, he was very sensitive to certain things. The art of divination was more Taoist. I didn't know much about it, so I didn't comment on the fat man's words. However, what moved me the most was what the fat man said next. He told me about a strange incident. "Third baby, do you remember He Yuan Shan?" Now that he mentioned it, I remembered the middle-aged man whose arm had been torn off by the female corpse. Not long after that, his arm had grown back. The fat man said mysteriously, "Why did He Yuan Shan's arm grow back?" I asked old he many times, but he always looked frightened. He kept a straight face and didn't let me talk about it. I don't know what happened to them, but I know that they fell directly into the underground palace. If my father fell into the underground palace, and He Yuan Shan's arm grew back, why couldn't my father still be alive? I didn't believe it before, but after Fatty's analysis, even I believed it a little. However, there was still one thing I didn't understand. If Fatty's father was still alive, why did he only peep at Fatty's life? Why didn't he find him directly? I asked the fat man. He sighed and said, "I don't understand, either. I guess his father has something he can't tell me." The two of us chatted for a long time, but we didn't have any clues. Unless we could find the fatty's father or return to that mysterious underground palace, we wouldn't be able to understand a lot of things. However, there was no news from Fatty's father, and the mysterious underground palace could not be found. There was nothing they could do. Perhaps only when the red shadow appeared again would he be able to find some clues about the underground palace. The two of us chatted about a lot of things during the meal. In the end, we ate for the whole afternoon. When we returned to the hotel, it was already nighttime. When I returned, the spirit snake was under Tong Tong's command. It rolled around the room and mopped the floor. It was as obedient as a pet dog. Tong Tong didn't need to swallow the Een spirits in the compass anymore. However, teaching the spirit snake had become his daily entertainment. Tong Tong didn't get tired of it. I stayed in the hotel for the last day to rest. On the morning of the third day, I went to Mr. Liu's company to meet with a large group of people. When I arrived, the others were already there. Fatty was quarreling with Secretary Bai. When he saw me, he stopped and came to greet me. "What happened between you and Secretary Bai?" Out of curiosity, I asked, "What happened between you and Secretary Bai?" The fat man fumed and told me. "A few days ago, I saw Secretary Bai on the street. Someone robbed her bag. I did a good deed and chased after the thief to take her bag back. Secretary Bai didn't see what happened. When she arrived, she didn't believe what the fat man had said. She insisted that the fat man had stolen her bag. Because of this, she had to go to the police station. She was so angry that she had a big fight with Secretary Bai. Coincidentally, when I returned to Mr. Liu's company, I met Secretary Bai again. The two of them were enemies, and their eyes were filled with hatred. They quarreled every time. His words made me laugh. Don't divination talk about fate? It's a coincidence. It must be fate. I was a little loud when I said that. Secretary Bai came to call us and heard me. I guess she thought that the fatty was interested in her. She shot him a disdainful look and snorted. Then she turned around and left. The fatty was enraged. He stormed towards Secretary Bai and wanted to argue with her. In the end, I pulled him back. People didn't know they were in the middle of a situation. The fatty and Secretary Bai looked like a typical quarrelsome couple. Perhaps something would happen in the end. Secretary Bai was beautiful, and the fatty had been irritated because of his father. It was good for him to be in a relationship to relax his mind. After this little episode, Mr. Liu arranged for us to have dinner. Then, we took 2 luxurious buses to Shenanjia. When we were about to leave, I found that Mr. Liu and Bai Ling were going with us. They wanted to participate in this operation. One of them was a boss who lived like a prince, while the other was a delicate little girl. On this kind of expedition in the wilderness, anything could happen. It would be dangerous. I didn't know what they were thinking. When we arrived at the Shenanjia Nature Reserve, it was the next morning. Although Mr. Liu was crazy about this operation, he arranged a relaxed schedule. After finding a hotel to stay, he asked us to rest for a day before departing. We slept in a hotel for the whole day. There were many entertainment programs in the tourist area, and the hotel also had a bar and a KTV. The fatty and I felt bored after dinner, so we went to the bar to rest. We met Bai Ling in the bar. She looked quiet, but I didn't expect her to be this wild. When we saw her, she was singing a rock song on the small stage of the bar. When she saw us, she waved at us to greet us. When the fatty sat at the bar, he said with an annoyed face, "This girl is a secretary, and she goes to the bar. She really doesn't know how to be clean." I looked at the fatty's resentful face and couldn't help but scold him. "Come on, even a little girl doesn't hold grudges like you." The fatty was still unconvinced, but his eyes kept glancing at the small stage from time to time. He looked like he couldn't help but say what he wanted. At this time, the waiter who was pouring us drinks suddenly asked us with a smile, "Sirs, you aren't here for a tour, right?" "Oh," I asked the waiter with interest. "How could you tell?" The waiter in the bar was probably used to chatting with people. He leaned against the counter and said with a smile, "I happened to see you guys when you came down this morning. There have been 2 more batches of people like you in the past few months. All of you came with your own car, full of supplies, tents, sleeping bags, and everything else. You must be heading deep into the mountains. People who come for a tour usually just play around in the scenic spots. There aren't any professionals like you." His words piqued my interest. There were 2 groups of people before. Did Chief Liu already try it twice before contacting me? Then why didn't he tell me? I asked the waiter, "Do you know what happened to the 2 groups of people before?" The waiter's eyes became vigilant. He shook his head and said, "We have a rule here. We can't easily divulge our customers' information." Before I said anything, the fatty took out a stack of money from his wallet and passed it over. The waiter cheerfully started to tell me about the two groups of people we had met before. According to him, the two groups of people were staying in this hotel, and they had booked rooms for 2 weeks. However, after staying for one night, they never came back. I was stunned. After exchanging glances with the fatty, I asked the waiter, "Then, did they leave from another path in the mountain and directly leave?" The waiter shook his head and said with certainty, "Of course not. The cars they drove when they came were all in the hotel parking lot. 2 groups of people, 4 cars, are still in the parking lot with no one caring about them." Saying this, he mysteriously poked his head out and lowered his voice. "I heard that they were all killed in the mountains. Not a single one escaped." The fatty subconsciously asked, Chapter 52. This trip would be dangerous, and I was mentally prepared. However, I had already sent people there, and something like this happened, yet Chief Lu kept it from us. I didn't know what he was thinking. I thought for a bit, then asked the waiter if he knew anything else. He shook his head and said, "That's all," and specifically told us not to tell anyone, saying that it would affect the tour here. At this time, Bai Ling came down from the stage and ran to our side. She enthusiastically asked us what we were talking about. She was Chief Lu's secretary, so she might have some relationship with Chief Lu. Naturally, I didn't say much and just casually chatted with her. Although the fatty and Bai Ling bickered as soon as they met, Bai Ling's personality was actually quite warm and straightforward. After chatting for a while, she even smiled and asked me how her singing was. Before I could reply, the fatty said with disdain, "How can you sing so happily with that tone-deaf voice of yours? Do you know why we're here? We're not here for sightseeing, singing, and going to bars." Whenever this guy talked to Bai Ling, his mouth was full of bullets. I moved back a bit and gave the place to these 2 lovebirds. Bai Ling casually pulled a chair over and sat down. She pouted and said, "Why don't I know? It's not a secret. Chief Lu's map clearly says that it's the Fire God Temple. It says that there's some kind of gem that can't be seen and the secret that can make people immortal. You can also obtain the power of the Fire God. It's really mysterious." I blanked. I didn't see what Bai Ling said on the map Chief Lu gave me. I glanced at the fatty and casually asked, "What else is written there?" Bai Ling pouted. "It's like a horror novel. It says that people are burned alive, and when they wake up, they can't see anything. I don't know why Chief Lu tore off the latter part. He's probably worried that you guys would be scared after reading it and not dare to go. Come to think of it, people like you should really believe in those kinds of evil and superstitious things. You guys aren't that old, but one knows feng shui, and the other is a fortune teller. It's really rare." After chatting for a while, Bai Ling received a call and said that she had to go to Chief Lu's place to take care of some matters. Then, she smiled and said goodbye to us. After she left, I exchanged glances with the fatty. Before I came here, I had checked the information with the fatty. The information provided by Boss Lu was the same as mine. He only knew the story and half of the map. Boss Lu didn't mention anything else. The fatty spoke first. "Looks like this Lu guy wasn't telling the truth. He tricked us into coming here just like that." I shook my head. Bai Ling might not be telling the truth. It's not that simple. Fatty was stunned and said hesitantly, "Although this woman has a strange temper, she shouldn't be that shrewd. Would she purposely lie to us?" His words made me frown. Originally, I was happy to see the 2 of them being so close to each other. However, the situation was getting more and more complicated. I couldn't see through Bai Ling. If the fatty really had something going on with this woman, it wouldn't be a good thing. I said, "Why don't you think about it? How could this young lady be that naive? They clearly knew how dangerous this trip was, yet they still came along just for some benefits. They didn't even care about their lives. How could he enjoy the scenery so easily along the way? This Bai Ling definitely isn't simple. You should be mentally prepared." Hearing me say that, the fatty became silent. He thought about it and didn't say anything else. The next day, when the sky was just starting to brighten, we got up and gathered. Facing the morning sun, we embarked on our journey. At the beginning, we could still see an endless stream of tourists. As the journey continued and we left the man-made scenic area, the number of tourists decreased. In the end, there were only a dozen or so of us left. The two tall and sturdy middle-aged men that we met before were called Tang Ming Yang and Fan Ji Chao. Other than the fatty and a few others that I saw the other day, the rest of the team were all arranged by these two people. They were all young lads around 27 or 28 years old. Each and every one of them had straight shoulders and a well-trained appearance. They looked like the retired special forces that Chief Lu mentioned. At this moment, Tang Ming Yang and Fan Ji Chao followed beside Boss Lu and Zhao Yongquan. The group walked in front and led the way according to the map. The fatty, me, and Bai Ling walked at the back under the protection of the others. This was also Boss Lu's arrangement. He said that he wanted to protect us and not make any mistakes. As we moved forward, the road under our feet became more and more desolate. However, it seemed that someone had walked on the road recently. There was already a narrow path, so we didn't need to waste time to clear a path. At noon, the group reached a canyon. I lifted my head to look at the terrain on both sides of the canyon. My eyes brightened. In the study of feng shui, the method of looking at the earth was to observe the dragon, and the art of observing the dragon was to examine the gorge. It was recorded in the death scripture. The gorge is where the true feelings of the dragon are found. Without a true dragon, there would be no beautiful gorge, and without a beautiful gorge, there would be no auspicious land. The meaning of this sentence was that by examining the terrain of the gorge, one could see the authenticity of the dragon's vein. If the dragon's vein was real, then the gorge's feng shui would be magnificent. If the gorge's feng shui was magnificent, then one could find a good place with good feng shui. Although this was just a normal mountain dragon's vein, it was different from the dragon's vein that geomasters searched for. However, the true dragon's vein that geomasters searched for was usually hidden in these mountain dragon's veins. When searching for these normal dragon's veins, one might find a trace of true dragon's energy and find the true dragon's vein. The appearance of a normal gorge was characterized by a broken lotus root and a gray line on a grass snake. It was also characterized by a bee's waist and crane's knees. The broken lotus root and the connected silk referred to the flow of water. If there was a meandering river in the gorge, the broken lotus root and the connected silk would appear and disappear from time to time. This meant that there was good feng shui. The gray line on the grass snake referred to the path under the gorge. If there was no path, it could be described as water. The bee's waist and crane's knees referred to the beauty of the gorge being long, but it couldn't be straight. It had to be slightly curved. Wherever there was a gorge, looking at the gorge to find the dragon was a shortcut. As for the gorge in front of us, the mountain range on the left rose up, giving the feeling of a loop. From a study of feng shui, this was called the welcoming gorge. The mountain range on the right was separated from the mountain range, giving the feeling of giving way. This was called sending the vein. All in all, this gorge was long and slightly curved. The mountain ranges on both sides were sending and receiving, sandwiching and carrying. It was well guarded, and the water was clearly divided. Moreover, the mountains on both sides were lush with vegetation, as if they were covered with a blanket. This kind of terrain was called the Crimson Brook Gorge. It was a good place with good feng shui. If we could find an auspicious cave in this gorge, we would be able to ensure our descendants' prosperity. In the past, I had only read about dead knowledge in the death scripture. Now that I saw the scenery in front of me and matched it with my knowledge, I felt that this trip wasn't in vain. Feng shui also changed because of the environment. In modern society, good feng shui was usually found in remote places. Normally, it was rare to see one. If a feng shui master wanted to find the dragon, he had to go to every dangerous secret territory. This gorge was really long. If we wanted to find the dragon vein, we would have to go there and slowly search. I wasn't in a hurry. As we approached the gorge, there was a river blocking the way. When Chief Lu and the others reached the river, they stopped and signaled us to rest. When we stopped to have lunch, Tang Mingyang and Fan Jichao sent some people along the river to find a way to cross the river. Half an hour later, the people returned. They said that they couldn't find a way to cross the river. There was a suspension bridge not far from here, but it was damaged. Chief Lu asked if we could swim across. Fan Jichao, who hadn't been smiling, said in a low, muffled voice, "This water is strange. I just tasted it, and it's salty. Moreover, under the sunlight, the water turns black. According to my experience, this river is around 40 meters wide, and it should be more than 100 meters deep." As soon as he said that, Bai Ling exclaimed in disbelief, "This should be a small river. How could it be 100 meters deep? Even the Yellow River and Yangtze River aren't that deep." Tang Mingyang explained with a smile, "If the water turns black, it means that the area where the sunlight shines is very shallow. There's a deep water area underneath that the sunlight can't penetrate. Usually, the water area that turns black is more than 100 meters deep. Moreover, the situation in the deep water is complicated and we don't know the creatures in the water. If we swim across, we'll be in trouble." At this moment, two mountain people carrying baskets on their backs walked over. They were walking by the river not far from us. They looked like a father and son. Chief Lu signaled Tang Mingyang with his eyes. Tang Mingyang quickly sent someone to call the father and son over. When we came close, I could see that the father and son were probably doctors who came to collect herbs. The young man's left hand was wrapped in bandages, and there were fresh bloodstains on it. It seemed he had just been injured. Chapter 53. Grandpa Mountain God? Hearing the words of a fellow villager, our group of people only laughed. The people Chief Lu had gathered this time were not simple. They were either retired Special Forces soldiers or Taoist priests with profound cultivation like Zhao Yongquan. No one would believe that the Grandpa Mountain God that these villagers were talking about was some kind of god. Tang Mingyang smiled and gave the fellow villager a cigarette. Then he asked, "Brother, the Grandpa Mountain God you're talking about, could it be the Shenangjia barbarians that people have been talking about?" Tang Mingyang's words were not steady and sounded like he was making fun of them. The young villager's son angrily glared at Tang Mingyang, but the villager didn't seem to care. He continued to blabber, "What barbarians? I've never seen them before. Grandpa Mountain God isn't a human, he's a god. You guys look like you have a lot of people, but if you dare to offend Grandpa Mountain God, I'm afraid you won't even have enough to eat." When he said that, Tang Mingyang became even happier. He looked pleasantly surprised. "Are you talking about a tiger?" Looking at his expression, his eyes were shining. He was probably thinking about entering the mountain to catch a tiger and eat its penis. This time, the good-tempered villager finally pulled a long face. "Why don't you guys listen to me? We villagers don't know much, but we wouldn't think that a tiger is Grandpa Mountain God. Don't think that I'm kidding you. In the early days, when there were bandits, a team of 100 people, each carrying a gun, entered Decapitation Gorge, and not a single one escaped. A tiger can't eat so many people." The smile on Tang Mingyang's face disappeared. A team of over 100 armed bandits was not a small fight. It was definitely much stronger than the less than 10 retired Special Forces soldiers in our group. If what the fellow villager said was true, then this Grandpa Mountain God that he was talking about really couldn't be underestimated. Chief Lu was also a little worried. Zhao Yongquan, who was standing not far from him, asked, "Chairman Zhao, what do you think this Grandpa Mountain God they're talking about is?" Zhao Yongquan waved his hand carelessly and said, "The foolish people in the countryside can even call yellow skin immortal Huang. This Grandpa Mountain God is probably just a wild spirit from the old forest. There's nothing to worry about. If we really meet him, we'll just get rid of him." While talking, Zhao Yongquan didn't lower his voice. Not only did I hear him, but the father and son also heard him. The young man with the bandage on his arm said angrily, "Dad, let's go. Why are you talking to them so much? They can't even cross the river. Even if they want to die, Grandpa Mountain God won't accept them." The old man put his basket back on his back and looked like he was about to leave. However, after taking 2 steps, he turned around and said in a serious tone, "You city people, listen to my advice. Don't play around by the river. Once it gets dark, go back. Don't talk about the decapitation gorge. Just this river is dangerous enough. You won't be able to cross it. Originally, we found a father and son to ask about crossing the river. The so-called Grandpa Mountain God could be treated as a joke, but crossing the river was a matter in front of us. We couldn't joke about it. Hearing the father and son say that we can't cross the river, Chief Lu couldn't sit still anymore. He quickly walked over and stopped the fellow villager who was about to leave. Without saying anything, he stuffed a stack of money into his hand and politely asked about the dangers of the river. Money could move the gods. The father and son, who originally had a bad expression on their faces, were now much more amiable. The young man was busy counting the money while the old man said, "You're quite knowledgeable, unlike them who only know how to talk big." Then, he glanced at Zhao Yongquan. Zhao Yongquan was enraged. However, Chief Lu was asking him questions, so he couldn't do anything. His face turned green. The people in our village call this river the Yellow Spring. Why is it called that? Because the water is strange. This river isn't very long, only 20 to 30 li long. However, the upper part of the river flows out from the Karst Cave underground. The lower part flows into the Karst Cave and flows out from underground. Then it flows back underground. Isn't this the Yellow Spring in the Netherworld? Wasn't this just a river formed by underground water flowing outside? Although this situation wasn't common, it was a little far-fetched to say that it was the Yellow Spring. Chief Lu obviously understood this. However, as a person in the business world, he naturally wouldn't be so direct with his father and son. Instead, he chuckled and echoed. Then, he asked, "Since it's called the Yellow Spring, I'm afraid that's not the only reason, right?" "Yeah," the old villager nodded. "Of course it's not the only reason. What's even more strange is that we always see dead people in this river. Every 1st and 15th day, there will always be a lot of corpses floating in this river from upstream. They float all the way until they finally enter the Karst Cave downstream. If this isn't the Yellow Spring, then what is it?" This time, no one thought that the old villager was talking nonsense. Thinking about the scene of the corpses floating in the river, they felt a little scared. Moreover, today was the 15th day. Could it be that there would be corpses floating in today? Everyone couldn't help but look back at the river, but they didn't see anything. Chief Lu asked again, "Why are there so many corpses in the river? Did someone die nearby, or something?" The old villager shook his head. "Who knows? This is deep in the mountains and forests. The villagers live a few miles away from here. Even if someone died, they wouldn't be sent here. The elders in the village all say that this river leads to the underworld. The corpses floating in from upstream are all wandering ghosts rushing to the underworld to be reincarnated." After listening to him say this, everyone was silent for a while. Finally, Tang Mingyang asked again, "Then if people swim in this river, will anything happen?" The old villager waved his hand and said that he didn't know. "The people in our village have seen corpses floating in the river since young. Even if they were crazy, they wouldn't swim in it. They originally wanted to find a guide, but after asking about the situation, it became even more difficult. The river wasn't long, but it was dozens of miles long. Moreover, there were mountains on both sides of the river. If we took a detour, we would have to go around the river for dozens of miles. Then, we would have to go to the mountains on both sides. Who knew if there would be other dangers waiting for us in the deep forest?" Seeing our hesitant faces, the young man, who looked around 17 or 18 years old, wanted to say something. However, as soon as he opened his mouth, the old villager scolded him and made him shut his mouth. After scolding his son, the old villager said goodbye to us and hurried to take his son back in the direction they had come from. As soon as they left, Chief Lu called for us. "We need to discuss what we should do." After a few minutes, we reached an agreement. Swim across the river. The old villager's words sounded strange, but the people in our team didn't believe in it. Or they believed in it, but they weren't afraid of it. At most, there would be corpses floating in the river. At most, we would be careful not to drink the river water. What else could we do? I didn't have any objections. We had just set out not long ago, and we couldn't let this river scare us. After making the decision, Fan Jichao waved his hand and called a young man, surnamed He. He took out 2 coils of rock-climbing rope and tied them to a big rock by the shore. Then, he tied one rope to Xiao He's waist as a safety rope, while he held the other one in his hand. After everything was done, Xiao He didn't seem to be stingy. He smiled at us and jumped into the river. He then swam to the other side. The retired soldiers in the group could swim easily, but the rest of us couldn't. That was why we had to get someone to pull a rope to the other side of the river. That way, those of us who couldn't swim could hold onto the rope and walk forward safely. Of course, the most important thing was to find someone to check if there were any dangers lurking in the river. When Xiao He swam, we watched him nervously. He swam left and right, then plunged into the water for half a minute. Everything was normal. We didn't see anything strange. We finally calmed down. Xiao He gave us an okay gesture. Then he pointed at the other side of the river and swam toward the other side. The river was around 40 meters wide. Moreover, the weather was good, so we could see the situation on the other side of the river, let alone Xiao He in the river. We could clearly see each of his movements. Seeing that Xiao He was only 7 or 8 meters away from the other side of the river, we all heaved a sigh of relief. However, right at this moment, Xiao He suddenly sank. The river bubbled twice, then calmed down. At first, we thought that Xiao He had plunged into the water and was ready to swim to the other side. However, after waiting for a minute, we still didn't see him. Fan Jichao's face changed. He hurried to pull the 2 ropes. Chapter 54. After this incident, the originally slightly relaxed atmosphere suddenly disappeared. Fan Jichao's subordinates had a good relationship with Xiao He. They hurried to go to the river to find Xiao He. However, Fan Jichao kicked them all back. With a gloomy face, they went to see Chief Lu for instructions. Soon, Chief Lu called me and the fatty over. Zhao Yongkuan was next to Chief Lu. He was standing by the river with a compass in his hand. He seemed to be calculating something. Since this happened, Fan Jichao, Tang Mingyang, and the other veterans couldn't do anything. We could only rely on the methods of outsiders. However, from the moment we arrived at the river, I had been observing the surrounding geomancy and the changes in yin and yang. No matter how I looked at it, this place didn't seem to have any problems. It wasn't a yin gathering ground or a corpse breeding ground. It was just an ordinary river. There was nothing strange about this place. Up until now, I hadn't found the problem. At least, I couldn't tell from the geomancy. If I wanted to find out the situation, I would need to use the eye or the snake spirit. However, Zhao Yongkuan was here, so I couldn't use them. After all, Professor Deng's mistake was a warning. Chief Lu asked me. After I shook my head, he looked disappointed. He turned to the fatty and asked, "What do you think?" The fatty shook his head. "I can only predict good or bad luck, but I can't predict the cause." Chief Lu asked again, "What about good or bad luck?" The fatty didn't answer. He squinted and flipped his hand. I didn't know when, but 3 copper coins appeared in his palm. I didn't see him flip his hand, but the 3 coins suddenly jumped twice. Then I heard the fatty speak in a voice that was completely different from before. He said calmly, "The heavenly thunder is unexpected. Good luck." While the fatty was talking, a strange light flashed in his squinted left eye. Then I saw his left pupil lengthen. When he said the word G, the pupil split in the middle, turning into 2 pupils, one above and one below. As soon as he said that, he put away the 3 copper coins. The upper and lower pupils fused together and returned to normal. There were 5 branches of Taoism: mountain medicine, fate, xiang, and divination. Although the Tao of divination was ranked last, it was the most profound and unpredictable, especially Fatty's Tao of divination. He did not cultivate Tao techniques and only looked at the mysteries of heaven. During the Tang Dynasty, Li Chunfeng and Yuan Tiangang created the pushing back diagram, which unexpectedly allowed them to pry into the fate of the nation for thousands of years. There was another characteristic of divination. Although it was an orthodox Taoist practice, it was destined to have 5 drawbacks and 3 flaws because it recklessly predicted the secrets of the heavens. Therefore, since ancient times, there were many blind and crippled divine fortune tellers, and many divination grandmasters would have many strange phenomena when they were divining their divinations. It could even be said that the more strange the phenomenon, the more profound the divination would be. Moreover, this was a kind of talent, not something that could be acquired. Fatty had told me before that he was talented in divination, but I didn't expect that he would be able to trigger a vision when he was doing divination. Moreover, it was such an amazing vision. Hearing Fatty's conclusion of good luck, Director Lou's face turned even uglier. A person had disappeared in front of him. No matter how he looked at it, it was not a good omen, but Fatty had received an auspicious divination. It was really hard to accept. After asking us twice, Director Lou didn't get any results. He turned to look at Zhao Yongquan, pinning his hopes on him. Unfortunately, Zhao Yongquan had been divining by the riverbank for almost half an hour. He looked tired and shook his head at Director Lou. Although he didn't say anything, it was clear that he hadn't found anything. While the three of us were silent, the old soldiers who were discussing by the riverbank screamed in surprise. They pointed at the river in the distance and started to discuss something. Our faces changed. We hurried to the riverbank and looked into the distance. Around 1 kilometer away from us, there was a black object. We could vaguely see that it was a corpse. Did Xiaohe's corpse come out of the water? If we could see the corpse, it was possible that Xiaohe's death was caused by a whirlpool under the water. We had thought too much about it. Everyone stared at the corpse as it floated closer to us. Only the fat guy suddenly performed another divination. In the same calm voice, he chanted, "Regenerate the land. There is a path in front of the mountain." I hadn't studied divination before, so I asked the fatty, what did he mean? The fatty put away the copper coins and smiled. "There's a chance. Because of that corpse?" The fatty nodded. "Most likely." As the corpse was floating closer and closer to us, Fan Jichao found a 5-clawed hook and tied it to a climbing rope. He waved it continuously. When the corpse reached the middle of the river in front of us, Fan Jichao loosened his grip. The 5-clawed hook flew 20 meters and landed on the corpse. Fan Jichao dragged the corpse toward us. Xiaohe was wearing black clothes, and the corpse looked black from the outside. It seemed to be Xiaohe. However, as the corpse got closer, we could tell that it wasn't Xiaohe. The corpse was lying face down in the river. From a distance, it looked like it was wearing black clothes. However, the corpse was naked. The black color was because the corpse had been dead for a long time. After the skin had rotted, it had been scorched by the sun. When Fan Jichao pulled the corpse to the riverbank and turned it over, we found that the bones of the corpse were big and the body was well preserved. However, the head didn't have much flesh, which made it look like a skeleton. I didn't know how long it had been dead, but it had been soaked in the salty water, which made it look like a mummy. Since the corpse didn't have any clothes on it, Fan Jichao and the others didn't find any clues. They became discouraged and asked us to go and check. The fatty's divination didn't work on the corpse, so he didn't go there. I shook my head and didn't go. When the corpse was pulled up, I checked it and didn't find anything wrong. My attainment in feng shui was still too low. Until now, I could only use some talismans. I couldn't do anything to this corpse. Zhao Yongquan went there. He shooed away the people who were watching the corpse. Then, he started to read a mysterious spell. As soon as I heard the spell, my eyes brightened. I had memorized the spell before. It was the hand seal technique, the soul-searching seal. Zhao Yongquan wanted to use the soul-searching seal. The soul-searching seal could search the 3 souls to know a person's history. Since the soul was still on the corpse, it was also useful. The hand seal technique was one of the 5 great Taoist techniques. With my current cultivation base, I couldn't use it yet. I had to wait until I reached the dragon-seeking stage to attract a wisp of true dragon energy in my body. Then, I could use the true dragon energy as the foundation to use the hand seal technique. It seemed that Zhao Yongquan's cultivation base was at least at the connecting acupoints realm after the dragon-seeking stage. After chanting a long and tedious incantation, Zhao Yongquan stretched out both of his hands and continuously changed their shapes in the air. After a series of gestures, he finally put his left palm up with 3 fingers together and his right palm facing inward, ending with 2 fingers side by side. Then he pressed down fiercely. The seal formed by his 2 hands seemed to have separated from his hands and formed a square seal. It fell at an extremely fast speed and fiercely imprinted on the head of the mummy. The people around held their breaths and looked at Zhao Yongquan. They were full of respect. However, at this moment, Zhao Yongquan groaned. His body trembled, and a trickle of blood trickled down from the corner of his mouth. It seemed he was hurt badly. Chief Lu walked over and asked, "Are you okay?" Zhao Yongquan frowned and looked at the corpse. After a while, he lifted his head and said to Chief Lu, "It's okay. I was careless. I didn't expect this corpse to be soulless." Soulless? Chief Lu frowned, as if he didn't understand what he meant. I walked over and explained to Chief Lu, "The corpse is still here, but there's no soul. There's only one possibility. The soul of the corpse and the soul of the person fused and gave birth to a Yin soul, which is what we often call a ghost. Moreover, Yin souls are born with corpses. The Yin soul of this corpse should be not far from us." Hearing that, Chief Lu's face changed. He called for everyone to be on guard. At this moment, Fan Jichao's subordinates started to make a ruckus by the river. They pointed upstream with a shocked expression. I followed their finger and saw more corpses floating down the river upstream. Chapter 55. Looking at this shocking scene, I remembered what my friend had told me. On the 1st and 15th day of each month, corpses would come to the Yellow Spring River. At that time, I had thought that it was just a random, nameless corpse, so I didn't pay much attention to it. However, after seeing this scene, I finally understood why my friend had said that no one in the village had ever swum in this river, and why they called this river the Yellow Spring. The corpses were lined up in a straight line, silently drifting forward. Under the bright sky, I couldn't see the end of the line. How many corpses did they have to have such an effect? My heart skipped a beat. If there were only corpses, it wouldn't be a problem. However, if they were all like the previous corpse, there would be a large number of ghosts waiting for us. Although those dried corpses didn't have any clothes on, and I couldn't tell which era they were from, they were at least several hundred years old. Ghosts that had been bred for several hundred years couldn't be underestimated. Moreover, there was a large number of them. Not only did my face turn grim, but the fatty and Zhao Yongquan also had the same expression. With Zhao Yongquan's hand seal, he could deal with 1 or 2 ordinary ghosts at the same time, no matter how strong they were. However, the number of corpses in front of us seemed endless. If even 1/10 of the corpses we saw turned into ghosts, we wouldn't be able to deal with them. Moreover, the number of corpses kept appearing. Who knew how many more we hadn't seen? If we couldn't deal with them, we would have to summon Tong. To Tong, as long as the other ghosts didn't turn into Yin spirits and become Yin gods, the number didn't matter. After the corpses lined up in a straight line and floated past us, people gradually got used to it. They recovered from the shock and started to guess the origin of these corpses. Chief Lu called us together. He didn't talk about the large number of corpses in front of us. "Do you want to take a detour?" Tang Mingyang and Fan Jichao agreed, but Zhao Yongquan and I didn't agree with this suggestion. Although we knew how dangerous those corpses were, we were metaphysicians. We had seen this strange situation before, so we had to investigate it. If we didn't do anything because of the danger, how could we improve our metaphysician's realm? Seeing that we weren't enthusiastic, President Lu felt a little awkward. Although he wasn't a metaphysician, he clearly felt the danger. If he didn't make a prompt decision now, who knew what would happen after dark? However, he had to consider my and Zhao Yongquan's face. Just as he was hesitating, Fatty suddenly said, "I remember when the father and son left today. The young man seemed to have something to say, but he was interrupted by his father." "Huh?" President Lu frowned and turned to ask him, "What do you mean?" The fat man smiled and said, "That father and son pair look like herb farmers. Obviously, they gather herbs for a living. Rare herbs usually grow in the mountains. Today, the father and son were carrying empty baskets. Obviously, they were going into the mountains to pick herbs. But after meeting us, they went back in the direction they came from. Don't you think it's a little strange? Zhao Yongquan also reacted. You mean the father and son know the way to cross the river? Fatty nodded. Although this place is already deserted, it only took us one morning to get here from the scenic area. For gatherers, this place is far from being deep in the mountains, and it's even more impossible for them to pick good herbs. Combining all the circumstances, the father and son pair definitely know the way to cross the river. President Liu thought for a moment, then gritted his teeth and said, All right, since they know the way to cross the river, let's invite them over. Fan Jichao. President Liu called Fan Jichao over and gave him some instructions. Then, Fan Jichao brought 4 to 5 people with him and hurriedly headed in the direction of the village downstream, according to the map. As for the rest of us, we stayed by the riverbank to rest. However, because the large number of corpses in the river looked too scary, we retreated a few hundred meters away from the riverbank in the end. About 2 hours later, when we finished dinner in the evening, Fan Jichao came back with his people. Together with him was the father and son pair who looked like they were in tears. Judging from their efficiency, Fan Jichao must have found them and kidnapped them without saying a word. President Liu tried to talk to them in a friendly manner, implying that we must cross the river and that we needed their help. The young man seemed a little scared and didn't talk much. His father kept shaking his head, saying that Grandpa Mountain God wanted to punish them. In the end, President Liu couldn't stand it anymore. He directly took out 50,000 renminbi and said that it was their reward and their last condition. If they didn't accept the toast, they would have to drink the forfeit. The old man didn't seem to be moved. However, before he could say anything, the young man agreed. Okay, I'll take you across the river. At first, we had only guessed that they had a way to cross the river. But now that it was confirmed, they couldn't refuse. The old man looked at his son with a sorrowful face. In the end, he could only nod reluctantly. At this moment, the negative emotions caused by the floating corpses in the river were finally relieved. We heaved a sigh of relief. The father and his son also introduced themselves. Their surnames were Zheng, so we called them Old Zheng and Little Zheng. After agreeing to take us across the river, Old Zheng told us how to do it. Tonight, at midnight, a path will appear on the river. I know the location, and I'll take you there. A path will appear on the river? It sounded a little strange. Instinctively, we didn't believe it. However, when we asked Old Zheng, he didn't want to tell us. When the time comes, we'll know if we follow him there. Don't be afraid. Tang Mingyang and the others laughed. If he's not afraid of the floating corpses on the river, why would he be afraid of anything else? Old Zheng said slowly, That bridge is more dangerous than those corpses. Tang Mingyang smirked to show that he didn't believe him. The others also laughed and didn't put Old Zheng's words in their eyes. It was time for dinner. We used the supplies we had brought and ate to fill our stomachs. Then, we started to pack up and prepare to leave. Before we left, Old Zheng went to find Mr. Liu. Tonight, I'll take you across the river. Can I let my son, Little Zheng, go back to the village first? Mr. Liu smiled and called Little Zheng. He took out 50,000 renminbi and said, If you go alone, you can take one person's money. If you go with 2 people, you can take 2 people's money. As soon as he said that, Little Zheng said, I can go with you. Old Zheng sighed begrudgingly and didn't mention it again. After packing up, around 11 o'clock p.m., Old Zheng took us to the upper reaches of the Yellow Spring River. Since we were walking along the riverbank, the full moon shone brightly on the river. We could see a row of floating corpses clearly in the dim light of the night. The surroundings were gloomy and gloomy. However, after looking at it for a long time, my heart gradually became numb. We were moving in the opposite direction of the floating corpses. However, our team was in a straight line, which looked similar to the line of corpses. I glanced at my team and then at the line of corpses on the river. I felt as if life and death were blending together. Soon after, Old Zheng and his son, who were walking at the front of the team, stopped and signaled to me that we had arrived. I lifted my head to look at the river and couldn't help but take in a deep breath. The river in front of us was also full of corpses. However, they weren't in a straight line like the ones downstream. Many corpses were piled up horizontally, covering the entire river. Moreover, these corpses were not crawling in the water. Instead, they were lying on their backs. On their skull-like heads, black mouths were wide open, staring straight at the moon in the sky, as if they were trying to absorb the moonlight. The moonlight shone on the two eye sockets, giving these mummies a pair of moon-white eyes. It looked strange and terrifying. The bridge that old Jung was talking about was actually the floating corpse bridge made of a pile of corpses. Looking at the numerous corpses under the moonlight, I recalled the death scriptures saying that zombies were born by swallowing the moonlight. My heart felt numb. Chapter 56. Everybody was dumbstruck by this strange and terrifying scene, including Zhao Yongkuan and me. We were speechless. At this moment, the calmest ones were old Zheng and his son. Old Zheng didn't seem to notice our expressions. He continued to nag. When you step on those corpses, you must be careful. Don't bump into those old skeletons. It was a new way of addressing those corpses as old skeletons. However, he didn't need to remind us. Anyone who crossed the river while stepping on so many corpses would be very careful. Little Zheng was proud of himself. He shouted, "Didn't you say that you weren't afraid when my father tried to talk to you? Why are you so scared that you don't dare to move now?" Young people weren't shrewd. They couldn't hold their anger back. As soon as they got the chance, they returned the favor to us. Chief Liu and Zhao Yongquan were experienced people. Of course, they didn't care about what he said. They just frowned and stared at the floating corpses on the river, their faces dark. The fatty, and I didn't mind him. We focused on studying those corpses. Tang Mingyang's team's veteran subordinates couldn't keep their composure. A short, sturdy, big-headed veteran stood up and pretended to be disdainful. What's there to be afraid of? It's just a pile of corpses, right? When I was a soldier at the border, I've crawled through mountains of corpses and seas of blood many times. Why would I be afraid of these corpses? As soon as he finished talking, he stomped on the riverbank and jumped toward the corpses in the river. "Come back. I don't dare to go down there." Chief Liu and Old Zheng's voices arose at the same time. However, it was too late. The big-headed veteran had jumped into the air. He couldn't turn back and directly landed on the corpses on the riverbank. Lao Zheng anxiously waved his hand at him. "You little boy, I haven't finished talking to you. Why did you go down? Come back quickly. Don't offend old Gu." When Big Head first stepped down, he still looked a little scared. He looked around carefully, but when Lao Zheng finished speaking, he saw that everything was fine, so he became proud. He stretched out his foot and stomped on the corpse he was stepping on. He grinned and said, "What else is there to explain? Isn't it just stepping on these things? Don't tell me. This person's body is quite hard. It's like stepping on a wooden board." This guy was really stupid and bold. As he spoke, he stretched out his leg to kick the corpse beside him. It seemed like he wanted to explore the way forward. But at this moment, the dried corpse under his feet suddenly swayed. He stood there with one leg, and his body immediately became unsteady. He staggered and fell onto the corpse next to him. Before his body fell, the dried corpse that had been lying flat on the river suddenly stood up and pounced on Big Head. When the people on the riverbank saw this scene, they all let out a cry of surprise and subconsciously took a step back. By the time they reacted, Big Head had been tightly hugged by the corpse. He fell on the other corpses and struggled desperately. This guy may have seen mountains of corpses and seas of blood, but he had never been hugged by a corpse. He struggled and screamed in fear. Tang Mingyang's veterans were the first to respond. Several of them rolled up their sleeves and prepared to go down to save people, regardless of why the dried corpse was moving. It could be seen that these people had deep feelings for each other. At this time, Lao Zhang shouted again, "Don't move. You can't go down there." Just now, they didn't listen to Lao Zhang's arrangement. Now that he said it again, Tang Mingyang and the others did not dare to act rashly and stopped. Lao Zhang hurriedly ran to the river and shouted at Big Head, who was still entangled with the dried corpse, "Don't move. Slowly move Master Gu's hands and feet away. You'll be fine. Hurry up and come back." After all, Big Head was a retired veteran. At first, he was scared and struggled. Now that he heard Lao Zheng's words, he quickly calmed down. He reached out and slowly moved the dried corpse's arms and legs away. Then his body shrank little by little and ran back to the shore like a dog. When he came up, Lao Zheng knelt on the shore and muttered to Master Gu, "Please don't blame me." Tang Mingyang and his people quickly surrounded Big Head and checked him for a long time. Except for his clothes being a little wet, there was nothing serious. Boss Lu walked over with a gloomy face. After waiting for Lao Zheng to atone for the corpse in the river for a long time, he asked, "Old friend, what's going on? Didn't you say that we can cross the river from here? Why are these corpses moving?" Old Zheng got up from the ground. He looked angry and said, "We can cross the river from here, but I haven't finished talking yet. These old skeletons won't harm people. However, when people walk, some of them will touch human energy and jump up to attack them. I was about to tell you about this, but your people just jumped up. You can't blame me for this." After listening to Old Zheng, I nodded. According to the death scripture, when the moon shone on a corpse, this could happen. However, these corpses weren't old skeletons as Old Zheng had mentioned. They were called shadow corpses. After the shadow corpses came into contact with people and inhaled human energy, they could move. However, they didn't have consciousness and couldn't bite people. They could only follow the smell of living people and jump on them. These shadow corpses weren't really scary. They just used their yang energy to move a little. However, there were too many corpses in front of us. If they all got up, it would be troublesome. Chief Lu wanted to discuss with us, but Old Zheng said, "These corpses can only appear before 3 o'clock a.m. After that, the corpses will scatter. We must cross the river immediately." We didn't have any objections, but Zhao Yongquan shook his head. "It's not good to cross the river like this. I need to check the corpses first." I understood that he was worried about the soulless corpse he had seen earlier. If all these corpses were soulless corpses, when we crossed the river, we would encounter a large number of ghosts. Little Zheng was worried. Several generations of my family have stepped on corpses to collect herbs in the mountain. At most, they would encounter the old skeletons people. But there's no danger. Who is Zhao Yongquan? He didn't care about Little Zheng. He directly asked his men to go to the shore and drag the corpses up. Tang Mingyang's men went there and hooked a corpse. However, they couldn't drag it up. The lower part of the corpse was tangled by something that looked like seaweed. Eventually, Zhao Yongquan had no choice but to go to the shore. He asked his men to tie the corpse to the shore with a rope. Then, he used the soul-searching seal to search the corpse's soul. When I saw him make a hand seal to guide his Tao energy, I suddenly remembered something in the death scripture. If a corpse shone on by the moon took a breath of qi, it would become a shadow corpse. However, if it took a breath of Tao energy, it would become a zombie. Zombies weren't like the shadow corpses, which didn't have any intelligence and only knew how to pounce on people. Zombies were brutal and liked to eat human blood. They would kill anyone they saw. If they really created a zombie, it would be a big problem. With this thought, I hurried to stop Zhao Yongquan. No matter what, don't use your Tao energy to touch the corpse. You might create a zombie. After Zhao Yongquan's hand seal was interrupted, he frowned and turned to look at me. "Are you from a Xiangxi corpse-raising sect?" I didn't know why he asked that. Instinctively, I shook my head. Zhao Yongquan asked again, "Are you from the Miao area?" I shook my head one more time. Zhao Yongquan swung his sleeves and said unhappily, "Kid, if you don't know about zombies, why are you talking nonsense?" It turned out that he didn't believe me. I couldn't blame him. The corpse-raising sect was very mysterious in the metaphysics world. They didn't have much contact with the outside world. Moreover, the method to create zombies was a secret technique that outsiders couldn't easily learn. If it weren't for the records in the death scripture, I wouldn't have known about it. I was worried about how to explain it to Zhao Yongquan, but he didn't say anything and continued to make hand seals. Chapter 57. In folklore, zombies were commonly seen. However, real zombies rarely appeared. In the legends, the shadow corpses were considered zombies, and even some dried corpses that couldn't move were considered zombies. Although their numbers were small, their power was extraordinary. Zombies were different from Een souls. After a person died, Een souls were formed by two of the three souls. They didn't have a physical body. Although they were mysterious and unpredictable, they didn't have any real power. They could only use bewitchment and confusion to harm people. Normal geomancy masters, or people who understood geomancy, had ways to deal with them. However, zombies were physical body. They were monsters that were born after a person's body didn't rot after death. In legends, zombies were soulless corpses. After the three souls were scattered, the seven spirits controlled the body, which gave birth to a ferocious monster. The saying of 3 souls and 7 spirits had been around for a long time. However, geomancy masters could easily sense the 3 souls, but the 7 spirits were vague. Only when they reached the heavenly master realm could they understand a thing or two. Moreover, even the lowest level of zombies was stronger than humans. Moreover, they weren't afraid of swords or spears. They didn't know pain, and they often carried corpse energy and corpse poison. Not to mention ordinary people, even ordinary geomancy masters couldn't deal with them. Only after reaching the earthly master realm could they use talismans and other methods to deal with them. In the death scripture, there were several corpse-subduing talismans that could be used to deal with ordinary zombies. However, this was under the premise that the geomancy master had prepared beforehand. If an earthly master met a low-level zombie, the geomancy master didn't have the corpse-subduing talisman, so he wouldn't be a match for the zombie. Moreover, this was just the lowest level zombie. If the geomancy master met a high-level zombie, even the corpse-subduing talisman wouldn't be able to deal with it. This was also the reason why the corpse-nurturing sects were so powerful in the metaphysics world. Through the corpse-controlling technique, even a newbie in the corpse-nurturing sect could control an ordinary corpse. Their strength was not to be underestimated. Because of the zombie's power and toughness, I panicked and tried to dissuade Zhao Yongquan. However, he didn't appreciate it. After drawing his energy and forming a hand seal, he directly pressed his palm on the dried corpse's abdomen. Seeing this, I secretly prepared myself. If the dried corpse turned into a zombie and became difficult to deal with, I would call the fatty and run away. It was a dangerous journey to begin with, and Zhao Yongquan wanted to create danger himself. I didn't need to stay and die with him. When Zhao Yongquan's handprint pressed onto the mummy's body visibly trembled a few times. However, it immediately calmed down, as if nothing had happened. What was going on? Could it be that there was a mistake in the death scripture? I looked at the dried corpse, which hadn't changed at all. I was puzzled. Zhao Yongquan slowly retracted his hand and glanced at me. Although he didn't say anything, everyone could see the disdain in his eyes. I quietly recalled the records about zombies in the death scripture. I was puzzled, but I didn't say anything. However, Zhao Yongquan frowned again. He turned around and told Director Liu that the corpse was still a soulless corpse. He was worried that a large number of spirits would appear nearby. While the two of them were discussing, little Zheng seemed to be very impatient. He shouted that his family had crossed the river from here for generations. If there was any danger, his family would have died long ago, and it would have been impossible for it to be passed down to the present day. Don't worry and just follow him to cross the river. What he said made sense. Eventually, after Director Liu and Zhao Yongquan discussed, they asked old Zheng to take us across the river. Since we had to be on guard against the shadow corpses, we formed a big circle. After we stepped on the bridge, we carefully walked to the other side. Only old Zheng and his son stood outside of us, one in front of the other, watching the surrounding situation. After going down into the river, the Een corpses pounced on them again, but with the example of Big Head, everyone calmed down a lot this time. After pulling the Een corpses away, they didn't care much and quickly left. When we reached the center of the river, we heard a scream from the back of the group. I followed the voice and was surprised to see little Zheng. A dried corpse was crawling on his body, tightly hugging his neck. Since the shadow corpses kept pouncing on people, we weren't surprised anymore, especially Tang Mingyang's subordinate, Big Head. He burst out laughing and shouted sarcastically, "Weren't you bold when you scolded others? Now that it's your turn, why are you so timid?" As soon as he said that, the other veterans burst out laughing. They didn't come to help, just standing there and watching the joke. Eventually, old Zheng ran to us. As soon as he saw his son's appearance, his face changed. He screamed and dashed forward. At this moment, I also found that something was wrong. No matter how timid little Zheng was, when a dried corpse pounced on him, he should have struggled a few times. However, after he was pounced on, he only screamed once. Then, he didn't make another sound. Although I couldn't see clearly into the moonlight, I could vaguely feel that the dried corpse holding little Zheng was different from the ones that had pounced on people earlier. I suddenly remembered what had happened and turned to look at the riverbank. The corpse that Zhao Yongquan had pinned to the riverbank was gone. As old Zheng was about to reach little Zheng, I dashed forward to stop him. However, old Zheng didn't go to save his son. Instead, he kneeled in front of the dried corpse, crying and begging old Gu to spare his son's life. I didn't know if the dried corpse could understand human language. However, as soon as old Zheng screamed, little Zheng's body slid out of the dried corpse's hand and slumped on the bodies of the other dried corpses. At this moment, people recognized that something was wrong. They all rushed to that side. When old Zheng saw his son fall to the ground, he didn't care about anything else. He dashed forward and hugged little Zheng. However, at first glance, he burst into tears. I lifted my head to look at the dried corpse standing next to me. My heart sank. This corpse looked completely different from the other dried corpses. Black smoke hovered around its body, and its dried face seemed to be fuller than the other dried corpses' skulls. Moreover, I could vaguely see two fangs in its pitch-black mouth. It was the appearance of the black zombie. In the legends, the black zombie was extremely strong and invulnerable. It liked to swallow people's blood. Since little Zheng had been hugged for a long time, I was afraid he had been killed. At this moment, before I could react, the black zombie lunged toward old Zheng. I wanted to go there and save him, but I didn't have the corpse-subduing talisman. If I went there rashly, I would only lose my life. While I was hesitating, Zhao Yongquan thundered. He didn't move, but he appeared in front of me in just the blink of an eye. He held a long sword in his hand and thrust it toward the black zombie. He was fast. Before the zombie could touch old Zheng, the long sword in his hand had stabbed the black zombie. However, after stabbing the zombie, Zhao Yongquan didn't look happy. Instead, he was frightened. The black zombie had a thick layer of something on its surface. His sword didn't harm it at all. We hadn't crossed the river yet, and old Zheng's safety was very important to us. Of course, Zhao Yongquan wouldn't just stand and watch the black zombie attack him. At this critical moment, Zhao Yongquan let out a loud shout. He took out a yellow talisman from somewhere and threw it at the black zombie. As soon as the talisman touched the zombie's body, it burst into flames and stopped the zombie's movements. Seizing this chance, Zhao Yongquan dashed forward and grabbed old Zheng. He turned around and ran toward the center of the river. The black zombie was a bloodthirsty and violent creature. After the yellow talisman stopped it, it became even more brutal. It chased after Zhao Yongquan. Zhao Yongquan didn't have a corpse-subduing talisman that could restrain the black zombie. At this moment, he just pulled old Zheng and ran. However, his speed wasn't fast, let alone the fact that he was carrying a person. As the black zombie was about to catch up with him, he suddenly turned and ran toward me. Chapter 58. When old Zheng was in danger and Zhao Yongquan went to save him, my impression of Zhao Yongquan had changed. I thought that although he was stubborn and arrogant, at least he had a conscience and morals. Who would have thought that he would bring trouble to me in just a blink of an eye? In terms of metaphysics, I was much weaker than Zhao Yongquan. If he couldn't deal with the black zombie, I couldn't do anything about it. He wanted to kill me by bringing the black zombie to me. The Taoists had the Mao summoning technique. They could cast talismans on their bodies and invite ghosts and gods to possess them. I had seen the Taoist priest who had joined hands with old he to fight the female corpse used the mouse summoning technique. Zhao Yongquan had just used the mouse summoning technique to carry old Zheng and run away. Although he was much slower than the black zombie because of old Zheng, he was still faster than ordinary people. At least, he was faster than me. As the black zombie was dashing toward me, I couldn't run away. I had to force myself to read the golden light divine incantation. Heaven and earth mystic sect, the root of all energies. Cultivate 1,000,000,000 tribulations to prove my divine powers. Inside and outside the three realms, the Tao reigns supreme. My body has golden light covering my body. See but not see, hear but not hear. Encompassing heaven and earth, nurturing all living beings. Recite it 10,000 times, my body has light. Guard to the three realms, 5 kings welcome. 10,000 gods worship, controlling thunder and lightning. The ghosts and demons were frightened, and the spirits and monsters lost their forms. Thunder and lightning, concealing the name of the thunder god. Insight and wisdom intersect, 5 energies surge. Golden light appears quickly, covering my body. The golden light divine incantation was a great incantation. It could be used to make talismans, hand seals, and even hand seals. However, with my current power, I could barely recite the incantation. As soon as I finished reading the golden light divine incantation, a golden light appeared on my body and covered me completely. In the next second, the black zombie tore through the air and pounced on me. Because of the golden light, the black zombie didn't directly touch my body. Instead, he touched the golden light first. This golden light was formed from the stellar energy of heaven and earth, and it possessed an unparalleled destructive power against all evil beings. The moment the black zombie's body came into contact with the golden light, a large amount of corpse chi emitted from it, and it was sent flying with a miserable shriek. I didn't have it easy either. Although I had blocked the attack, the strength of the black zombie's attack was too great. After he was sent flying, I was also knocked to the ground. I tasted something sweet in my throat and spat out a mouthful of blood. At the same time, the golden light on my body extinguished. If the dark zombie pounced on me again, I would have died here. I endured the pain in my chest. As soon as I fell to the ground, I quickly got up and held the magic compass in my hand. I was prepared to ask the snake spirit to help me escape when the black zombie charged at me again. This snake spirit was a snake spirit that had cultivated for many years when it was alive. Although its power had been greatly reduced because of the disappearance of the Yin energy from the compass, it was still more than enough to help me escape. This magic compass was too precious. If I used it to escape, I would have to expose myself. However, I didn't have time to worry about that at this moment. The black zombie was burned by the golden light, and its tough body had many wounds. Corpse chi gushed out, which was the source of the dark zombie's power. It was obvious that it had been hurt badly. The dark zombie was hot-tempered, and at this moment, it was even more enraged. After the corpse chi on its body extinguished the golden light, it screeched and stormed toward me again. Director Liu, who was standing not far from me, shouted for Zhao Yongquan to come and help. The fatty also ran toward me. I held the compass tightly in my hand, but I didn't call the snake spirit. I didn't want to expose the magic compass until the last moment. Just as Black Zombie was a few steps away from me and was about to pounce on me, Zhao Yongquan suddenly tossed out a slender stone-like object and muttered, "Suppress." Then, the stone-like object quickly flew to the top of the Black Zombie's head and pressed down. I took a closer look. That slender stone-like object was actually a paperweight. It looked really small, but when it flew above the Black Zombie's head, it seemed like it was carrying a 1,000-kilogram boulder on its back. Its pouncing movements were stopped, and it couldn't even fight. It fell face up into the river. I was startled. I looked at the small paperweight again. It was glowing with Tao energy. It was a magic tool. Although it wasn't a magical tool with a spirit like the compass, this kind of magical tool was still rare. It was a suppressive magical tool. The paperweight originally had the ability to suppress, and it had been nourished by Zhao Yongquan for many years. Although it looked like a small stone, it was no different from a 10,000-kilogram boulder to an evil being. Even an incomparably strong black zombie couldn't resist it. Zhao Yongquan was worthy of his title as the president of the Taoist Association in the city. He had casually taken out such a rare magical tool. After being pressed into the river, the dark zombie was unwilling to give up and struggled again. However, he couldn't get rid of the paperweight's oppressive power. He slowly laid there motionlessly. I finally let go of the magical compass and exhaled. Zhao Yongquan calmly walked in front of me and looked at me strangely. After a while, he opened his mouth and asked, "May I know who Mr. Zhou's master is?" "Is the divine incantation you just chanted one of the 8 great divine incantations, the divine golden light incantation?" The author of the death scripture wasn't written in it. Of course, even if it was written, I wouldn't say it. From Zhao Yongquan's expression, the divine golden light incantation wasn't simple. It was one of the 8 great divine incantations. I didn't know if Zhao Yongquan was sure, but I couldn't easily admit it. I shook my head and said, "This is only a protective incantation passed down by my master. As for who my master is an unworldly person, so it's inconvenient to divulge his name." My attitude was a bit cold, causing Zhao Yongquan's expression to become unhappy. He coldly snorted and said, "You and I are traveling together, and I just saved your life. Mr. Zhou, you aren't even willing to reveal your master. Aren't you not giving me face?" This person's skin was really thick. I was angry, so I didn't care about his feelings and said with a mocking tone, "Daozhong Zhao, when you tried to shift the blame to me, you probably didn't think about our friendship, right?" Zhao Yongquan was speechless. After a moment of silence, he said, "Previously, you said that if I draw energy and touch these dried corpses, they will give birth to zombies. Although I didn't believe it at the time, I naturally believed you after they really gave birth to zombies. I thought that since you knew how to create zombies, you would naturally have a way to deal with it. Just now, the situation was dangerous. In order to save people, I asked you to block the zombie. Although you were injured, your life wasn't in danger. What does Mr. Zhou think is wrong?" After he said that, the surrounding gazes that were originally filled with sympathy for me disappeared. Even the fatty's resentful gaze became much calmer. Only I sneered in my heart. What he said sounded reasonable, but in reality, he was just twisting words and forcing logic. Feng Shui and Taoism came from the same source. Zhao Yongquan's cultivation base was much stronger than mine. I couldn't see through him, but he could see through me with just a glance. This black zombie was extremely powerful. If he didn't have a suppressive magic tool, he wouldn't be able to deal with this powerful black zombie. At that time, he directly shifted the blame to me. If I didn't know the golden light divine incantation, I'm afraid I would have been lying on the ground with little Zheng. If the golden light divine incantation wasn't so famous, I'm afraid Zhao Yongquan wouldn't have come to explain to me. Now, he was blaming me for being narrow-minded. When Director Liu saw our tense atmosphere, he proactively came to us and tried to smooth things over. Zhao Yongquan snorted and didn't want to argue with me. He turned around and returned to the front of the team. However, before he left, he stooped to look at the paperweight that was still suppressing the black zombie's body. He looked like he was in pain. As the black zombie wasn't dead yet, he didn't dare to take the paperweight away. He could only leave it here. When we got back, he would see if he could take it away. After persuading us, Director Liu went to old Zheng and comforted him. However, little Zheng was dead. The grief of losing his son wasn't something that could be soothed with just a few words. Old Zheng had agreed to take us to the decapitation gorge. But now, he stood up and carried little Zheng's body on his back. He was determined to go back. As things had come to this, Director Liu couldn't force him to stay. He had to pay more money and let old Zheng leave. As soon as old Zheng left, we didn't dare to linger. We hurried to gather the team and headed to the other side of the river. I didn't know why, but as soon as we took a few steps, the corpse in the river started to sway up and down. Moreover, the sway became bigger and bigger. We couldn't stand still. The fat man was the first one to react. He stooped to look at the river. In just a blink of an eye, his left pupil turned into a double pupil. He said in a low voice, "There's something at the bottom of the river." Chapter 59. When we reached the shore, one of Fan Jichao's veterans suddenly screamed. His body sank into the water and disappeared. Xiao He, the one who had tried to swim, also sank and disappeared. At that time, I suspected that there was a giant fish underwater. However, since we were far away, I couldn't see clearly, so I couldn't come to a conclusion. At this moment, that veteran was less than 10 meters away from me. He had disappeared without a trace. It couldn't be a water monster. Fan Jichao wanted to dive into the water to check, but Tang Mingyang pulled him back. "Let's cross the river first. It's clear that we have to give up on that veteran." Fan Jichao didn't have the heart to do that, but Chief Lu urged him to hurry. Eventually, Fan Jichao had to give up and climb to the shore. The corpses in the river were bobbing up and down. The veterans were agile. When they reached the riverbank, they just needed to grab the water plants by the table to get up. The fatty and I didn't have this ability. We had to rely on Fan Jichao and Tang Mingyang to pull us up one by one. When I got to the shore, the corpses in the river were like boiled dumplings. They were bobbing up and down. Some of the corpses were tossed into the air. They were connected to something that looked like a long rope. I didn't know how far they were going to go, but I couldn't see the end. At the bottom of the river, I heard a loud rumbling noise. It sounded like a house collapsing during an earthquake or a giant beast roaring. Although we didn't know what was down there, we all felt the danger. After we got to the shore, we hurried to retreat. When I was about to leave, I saw the fatty, who had just gotten to the shore, crawl toward the river again. He was shouting something, but the commotion at the bottom of the river covered his voice. I couldn't hear him clearly. I looked into the river and saw that Bai Ling was still in the water. The corpse under my feet couldn't stand anymore. Half of his body was in the water, and he was grabbing the water plants by the shore. His other hand was trying to reach up, but he couldn't reach the hand of the person on the shore. He was so anxious that his face was covered in tears. The fatty was also restless. He almost wanted to jump into the water to save Bai Ling. I pulled him back and prepared to read the 5 ghosts carrying spell to lift Bai Ling out of the water. However, before I could finish my chant, I felt the Yin energy around us rise. I stopped. The 5 ghosts transfer spell was used to summon 5 ghosts nearby to help. Normally, it would only attract some wandering ghosts, so it wasn't a big deal. However, there were so many soulless corpses here, so who knew how many ghosts were hiding in the surroundings? If a ghost with a high cultivation was attracted, then it wouldn't be saving people, but harming people. With such a delay, Bai Ling's body slid further into the river. Only her shoulders were still above the water surface. She was in a precarious situation. The floating corpses in the river were all thrown into the air. Only the seaweed-like things under their bodies were still hanging in the river. In the middle of the river, bubbles kept popping up, as if something huge was slowly drilling its way up from below. The fatty was sweating all over his body, and he was shivering. I wonder if he had sensed something. Diviners could see the mysteries of the heavens, and they were very sensitive to things in the dark. Even an ordinary person could feel the endless danger, let alone the fatty. However, his face was frightened, but he didn't want to give up on Bai Ling. He tried his best to reach out his hand to save her. Feeling helpless, I took out the compass one more time. I didn't care if I was exposed or not. I wanted to summon the snake spirit to save Bai Ling. But at this moment, it was Zhao Yongquan again. He muttered something and formed a mysterious hand seal with his hand. Then, he stretched out his hand and waved towards Bai Ling. Bai Ling seemed to be pulled by an invisible hand as she jumped out of the water for a long distance. Then, Fatty and Tang Mingyang reached out to grab her at the same time and pulled her to the shore. When we reached the riverbank, Bai Ling's face was pale. She was still scared. She directly jumped into the fatty's arms and sobbed. The fatty didn't care about having tender feelings for the fairer sex. He pulled Bai Ling and ran away from the river. I followed behind him. While running, I turned to look at Zhao Yongquan. The hand seal seemed to have consumed a lot of his energy. After pulling Bai Ling up, he vomited blood, his face pale. My impression of him had changed a lot. Although he was arrogant and harsh, and his attitude toward me was strange, he wasn't a bad person. First, he saved old Zheng, and now he saved Bai Ling. When we saved old Zheng, we could say that he wanted to take us across the river. However, saving Bai Ling was purely for the greater good. When we were around 100 meters away from the riverbank, another earth-shaking explosion arose from the other side of the river. We couldn't help but turn a look. The river suddenly emitted a golden light. A golden object slowly emerged from the middle of the river. When I saw the golden object, I felt as if something had hammered my chest. My vision darkened. Although I didn't faint, I didn't have the strength to run anymore. My legs softened, and I slumped to the ground. The others weren't in a better state than me. They all fell to the ground. Tang Mingyang, Fan Jichao, and the other ordinary people had fainted. Only the fatty, Zhao Yongquan, and I opened our eyes. We absent-mindedly looked at the golden light in the river. Unexpectedly, Chief Lu didn't faint. He looked intoxicated as he looked at the golden light. His expression was different from ours. However, we didn't notice it. The golden light became thicker and thicker. After my eyes got used to it, I could see a massive golden head rising from the river. The tens of thousands of golden light beams were coming from this head. Apart from that, the head was also covered in thick and lush hair that extended outwards endlessly. At the end of each strand of hair was a corpse that was dancing in the air. The thing we saw below the corpse wasn't the seaweed. It was the head's hair. Each of the corpses was connected to the head's hair. It looked really strange. This golden head was really big. As it was shrouded in the golden light, it looked really majestic. It looked like an emperor of the human world. After the head emerged, it stopped moving in the middle of the river. The water under it didn't surge anymore. I couldn't tell if the head had a body or not. Just the head alone was so big that it occupied half of the river. If it had a body, how big would that body be? Before I could figure it out, the giant head moved again. Its eyes slowly opened, looking at us. The moment he opened his eyes, the few of us who were still conscious couldn't help but look at him. We blankly stared at his huge eyes. In that moment, I seemed to see the rising and falling of the sun and the moon, as well as the movement of the stars, in the eyes of the giant head. In the next second, the two giant eyes slowly closed, and the river began to surge. Shortly after, the golden head slowly sank to the bottom of the river. The corpses floating in the air also slowly sank. This time, they didn't cover the entire river. Instead, they formed a vertical line, slowly drifting downstream. After the head had disappeared for a long time, we slowly woke up and looked at each other. Our eyes were filled with endless shock. I asked the fatty, "Can you perform a divination to see the origin of this giant head?" The fatty hugged Bai Ling, who had fainted in his arms. He didn't think much and shook his head resolutely. "If you try to guess the heaven's secret, you will be devoured." I had to give up. I took 2 deep breaths to calm my wounds. When I was about to get up to check the others, I saw Chief Lu kneeling not far from me. He was on his knees, his entire body on the ground. He was muttering something in the direction of the river. I didn't know what he meant. When I was about to ask him, he stood up. "You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories."